Hey everyone. Since the views and subscribers haven't been quite where I'd hoped, I've decided to put the longer series on hold for now and focus on shorter stories instead. Hope you enjoy them. Before you settle in, if you could give the video a thumbs up and subscribe, but only if you're genuinely enjoying the content, of course. Got any ideas or missed the series format? Drop me a comment below. Your input will really help me decide whether to bring the series back. Alright, enough rambling. Let's begin. I parked my Ford pickup truck on a sharp curve on the winding mountain road, and the windshield was squeaking as the wipers scraped. The phone screen was on, but the signal bar was empty, as if someone had scratched it off with a fingernail. The car radio suddenly exploded. It was an unhuman sound, a shriek wrapped in a bubbling whisper, like someone pressing fingernails on a chalkboard with broken glass mixed in. I turned the knob and scanned from AM to FM 3 times. Every frequency was clinging to this noise, like a piece of chewing gum that couldn't be shaken off. The smell of rust wafted through the rain and fog. I rolled down my window and saw a red Chevrolet parked on the side of the road with its door wide open, and wrenches and a fuse box scattered on the passenger seat. 50 meters further ahead, a blue pickup truck was tilted in the gutter. The toolbox in the back had rolled out, and screwdrivers and multimeters were toppled over, as if they had been kicked over by someone in a panic. The road sign for Silver Creek Town blurred into a blur in the rain. When I stepped on the accelerator, I suddenly felt a chill on the back of my neck. Those abandoned cars looked like someone had been driving them, and suddenly didn't want them anymore. The radio station in the center of town had a faded wooden sign with 3 of the 4 letters, Silver Creek voice missing. I had just parked the car when the door was kicked open. "Are you Jane Mason?" The woman's voice was like a taut string. She grabbed my work jacket and dug her nails into my arm. "The radio repairman." "She is Erin Walker, the town radio station manager." The information said she was 37 years old, but at this moment the dark circles around her eyes were big enough to fit 2 coins, and her hair was messy as if it had been electrocuted. "Sign the contract first." I pulled out the contract, but she dragged me straight into the door. "I'll give you the money tomorrow. Come in now. You have to explain the equipment failure clearly." I stopped. "Is the transmitter burned out, or is the antenna broken?" She suddenly leaned in close to me, her breath on my face. "You can't turn it off." "What?" "No matter what we find out." She clenched her fingers into fists, her knuckles turning white. "We can't turn off the radio." I stared at the corners of her trembling mouth. The contract stated $30,000, enough to pay for my father's dialysis and ICU bed fees this month. "Okay." I stuffed the contract back into the tool bag. "Let's look at the equipment first." The equipment room at the radio station is smaller than I thought. The old transmitter took up half of the wall, with the wires coiled on the ground like a snake. I squatted down to check the wiring connection. The copper sheet was polished to a shine, and there were no burn marks. I measured the voltage, and it was as solid as a rock. "Where is the signal source located?" I looked up and asked Irene. She huddled in the corner, staring at the wall clock. Every time the second hand moved 1 tick, she trembled. I pulled up the signal tracking software. The green dot on the screen should have marked the source of the signal, but now it was like muddied water, drifting east and west. "Weird," I muttered, and put on my headphones. The moment the noise came in, my temple exploded. "Don't stop. Keep listening." The sound seemed to come from far away, but also seemed to be piercing directly into the eardrum. I staggered and held onto the corner of the table, my forehead resting against the cold metal, cold sweat oozing from the back of my neck. The smell of disinfectant suddenly rushed into my nose. "Jane, listen to this." My mother's voice was very soft, mixed with the footsteps in the hospital corridor. I was 10 years old, curled up on a couch in a therapy room, with scratchy white noise blasting through my headphones. "These sounds will help you block out bad things, like putting a door on your ears." The headache suddenly got better. I took off my headphones and stared at the sweat on my palms. The noise was still buzzing in my head, but as if through a layer of frosted glass. "Is your mother a psychiatrist?" Irene suddenly asked. I turned to look at her. She was staring at the embroidery on the pocket of my work jacket. The words Mason Psychological Clinic had been washed out. It went bankrupt 8 years ago. I pulled my pocket. "Is it related to the current problem?" She didn't answer, staring at the surveillance screen on the wall. I followed her gaze. The surveillance camera was showing the front door of the radio station, and there was no one there. "Try turning off the main power." I walked towards the switch. Irene suddenly rushed over and grabbed my wrist. "Don't." With a click. The sound of electric current exploding. The noise in the headphones turned into a sharp wail, like someone being dragged on broken glass. I suddenly pulled off my headphones, and a bang sound came from outside the glass window. Someone is banging on the door. I moved closer to the window. In the rain, a man in a plaid shirt held a hammer and hit the door frame again and again. His face was twisted into a ball. Drool was dripping from the corners of his mouth, and he kept muttering, "You can't stop. You can't stop." "He's Tom Harris, a lumberjack from the east end of town." Irene's voice was trembling. "He helped me move equipment 3 days ago." The dull thud of the hammer hitting the door hurt my eardrums. Tom's knuckles turned blue and white on the hammer handle, and his pupils dilated with every blow. "Call the police." I took out my cell phone, but there was still no signal on the screen. "Sheriff Bryan is at the town hall." Aaron grabbed my tool bag. He said outsiders can't be trusted." "Then can you trust me?" I stared at her shaking hands. She suddenly let go. The tool bag fell to the ground, and the wrench rolled to Tom's feet. He bent down to pick it up, but froze halfway. His eyes were staring at me, as if he was looking at something living. "Jane," Irene screamed. I turned around, and Tom's hammer had already smashed through the glass. The moment the debris flew, I rushed over to grab Irene, but I hit nothing. She was huddled in the corner, staring at my back with the look of a frightened deer. "That's enough." A deep male voice exploded. Sheriff Brian Hart stood in the doorway, twirling his baton in his hand. He was a big man, with broad shoulders that squeezed the door frame so tightly that only a crack was left. The police badge gleamed coldly in the rain. Tom's hammer hung in the air. Brian took a step forward, and the baton struck him on the wrist. Tom groaned, and the hammer fell to the ground with a clang. "Take him to the town hall." Brian raised his chin to Irene. "Lock him in the storage room." Irene rolled and crawled, grabbing Tom's arm. Tom was as obedient as a puppet. When he was dragged away, he looked back at me with a crooked smile on his face. "Miss Mason." Brian turned to me, looking at me as if he were a suspicious piece of metal. "I heard you were going to shut down the radio station." "Just checking." I bent down to pick up the tool, and my fingertips touched the cold wrench. This was my only sense of security. "Don't do anything stupid." His voice became deeper. "The rules of Silver Creek Town are not something that outsiders can understand." The rain is still falling. I watched his back disappear in the rain, and touched the back of my neck. There was still the coolness from Tom's look at me. The clock in the equipment room chimed. I looked up and saw the second hand stopped at 12. "You were clearly walking just now." I squatted down to check the transmitter, and my fingers touched a scratch on the bottom of the case. A few crooked letters that looked like they had been scratched out with a fingernail. "Save us." The wall clock in the equipment room stopped. I stared at the word "Save Us," scratched by my fingernail under the second hand, and my back teeth were sore from biting it. I nearly threw the wrench at the door as it was flung open. Brian's shadow loomed over me, the police badge on his chest gleaming so brightly that it hurt my eyes. "Miss Mason, I thought you were just here to do some maintenance." His voice was like rusty gears, not to dismantle the equipment. I stuffed the wrench into my tool bag. The power tripped. "I have to restart it." "Don't touch the switch." He reached out and pressed the control panel, his knuckles turning white. 3 days ago, old Jack wanted to unplug the radio, and now he's gnawing at the wall in the town hall storage room. The day before yesterday, Martha was taking her grandson on a winding mountain road, and the car flipped into a snow ditch. He paused. The search and rescue team only found half a snow boot. My throat tightened. So you're just gonna let this damn signal continue? This signal is not a ghost. He suddenly leaned closer, and I smelled the rust on his collar. They are talking. When he turned around, he saw a dark red rash on the back of his neck, as if he had been bitten by something. I stared at his back as he disappeared into the corridor and took out my cell phone. There was still no signal, but the payment reminder for my father's ICU was saved in my address book, and the text message alert sounded particularly harsh in the silence. I need that repair money. I also need to figure out what's wrong with this place. Lisa's library is diagonally opposite the town hall. When I pushed the door open, she was taping up the broken window glass that Tom had broken this afternoon. Jane? She looked up, her eyes behind the lenses swollen like 2 red cherries. Brian said you were tinkering with the radio. I need the town history files. I placed the toolkit at her feet. The mine disaster files from 20 years ago. Her hand shook, and the tape rolled to the ground. How did you know? There's a scratch on the chassis in the equipment room. I squatted down to pick up the tape. It says save us. She was silent for a long time, so long that I thought she was going to chase me away. As a result, she lifted the iron plate under the counter and dragged out a dusty metal box. After the mine disaster, the town committee sealed all records. She flipped through a stack of yellowed telegrams. This was the last communication intercepted by the radio station at the time. 17 miners were trapped underground. The gas concentration exceeded the standard, and they used the emergency radio to send a distress signal for 7 hours. I took the telegram. The handwriting on the last page was crooked, and the ink dots blurred into a blurry mass. Battery remaining 5%. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? We are in B3 tunnel, and the top of our heads is collapsing. Don't turn off the radio. Don't turn it off. And then, when the rescue team arrived, the mine had collapsed. Lisa's voice was as light as a sigh. They said there were no survivors in the mine, but someone heard the radio was still ringing. She suddenly grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into the flesh. Jane, the noise you heard is the same frequency as the distress signal back then. There were sirens outside the window. Brian's patrol car drove past the library, and the headlights swept across the glass, casting a pale light on Lisa's face. Tonight at 10 o'clock, at the mine entrance. She released her hand. Mark Reynolds will be there. He participated in the search and rescue that year, and now he is still awake. The wooden sign at the mine entrance creaked in the wind. I was crouching behind a bush in the dark, and the watch hands had just reached 10 o'clock. You shouldn't have come. The voice came from behind. I turned around, and the muzzle of the shotgun was pressed against my forehead. Mark Reynolds' face was in shadow, except for his eyes, which were frighteningly bright, like a wolf or like he was possessed. Lisa said you were still awake. I didn't move. I need to see Tunnel B3. His finger tightened on the trigger. Awake, he laughed, and the wind with the smell of rust blew into my collar. I can hear them banging on the mine wall every midnight, shouting, "Don't turn off the radio." Why do you think Lisa asked you to come? She was so scared that she even locked her own shadow in the filing cabinet. What about you? I stared at the marks on his rifle butt. 17. The same number as the number of people killed in the mine. What are you afraid of? His gun shook. Follow me closely. He turned and walked into the mine without looking back. Don't scream if you fall to your death. The moisture in the mine tunnel, mixed with a musty smell, penetrated my nose. I took out my tactical flashlight and swept the beam across the rock wall. There were faint scratches under the moss, like those made by human fingernails. Mark walked in front, keeping his shotgun pointed at the ground and tapping the rock wall with his boot heel every 10 steps, like some kind of secret signal. How far is it? My temple began to throb. "Don't worry." His voice was muffled in the front. "Wait until you hear the sound of water." The sound of water was seeping down from above my head. I looked up and saw dark brown water stains on the rock wall, like coagulated blood. My headache suddenly intensified, and I staggered to hold on to the wall. My palm touched something sticky. It was hair mixed with rotten cloth, stuck in the cracks of the stone. "Jane?" Mark's voice suddenly faded away. I looked up, and his shadow appeared as a double in front of me. Faces appeared on the rock wall, blue-gray in color, with flapping eyelids and lips opening and closing. "Save us." Their voices sounded like crumpled tapes. "Don't turn off." I covered my ears and squatted down. The skin on the back of my neck began to feel hot, as if someone was scraping it with a red-hot wire. In a trance, my mother's voice emerged from my memory. "Jane, listen to this." The rustling sound of white noise mixed with her whisper. "Does it sound like ocean waves?" I fished out my phone and pulled out the voice memo my mother left. The buzz of white noise exploded in the mine tunnel, and the faces instantly retreated into the rock wall. I stood up with the help of the wall. Mark was staring at me, and the vigilance in his eyes faded a little. "D3 has arrived." He knocked on the stone door in front with the barrel of his gun. Behind the door is a circular mine pit. The light of the tactical flashlight swept across the bottom of the pit, and I saw an old-fashioned radio. The metal shell was covered with rust, but the antenna was shiny. Wrapped around it were 17 pairs of rotten overalls. The trouser legs were still stained with slag, and a rusty work badge was hung on the waistband. The top work badge was illuminated by the flashlight, and the young man in the photo smiled at me. I moved closer and discovered that the antenna wasn't made of metal. It was a human spine, strung together, with a bluish skull stuck at the end, and half a telegraph key stuffed in the eye socket. "Don't look." Mark's voice sounded like someone was strangled. I looked back, and his eyes were as red as if they were soaked in blood. "Don't touch it." He raised the shotgun and smashed the butt of the rifle against my temple. "They'll hear you. They'll..." I dodged to the side, and a tool bag hit his knee. He staggered with a groan, and I rushed over to grab his wrist. We rolled on the ground, his nails digging into my shoulders, and he kept shouting, "They're waiting, they're waiting." I found the wrench and hit him on the back of the neck. His body went limp. I gasped and searched his pockets. I pulled out a rusty brass key and a half slip of paper with jagged edges. On it was written in red ink, 12 o'clock, basement of the radio station. From deep within the mine came the hum of electric current. I looked up, and the indicator light of the old radio suddenly lit up. The green light flickered in the eye sockets of my skull, like someone blinking. After knocking Mark out, I knelt on the ground, gasping for breath. His shotgun rolled into the corner, the barrel still steaming. I pulled his wrist and felt his pulse. It was beating too fast, like a rabbit with its tail stepped on. The toolkit zipper scraped against his trouser pocket, and the metallic sound made my fingers tremble. The first thing he touched was a copper key. The teeth marks on it were polished to a shine, as if it had been used repeatedly. The second item was half a piece of paper with rough edges and smudged red ink, which read, "They are not dead, they are just still waiting." I held the note tightly. Whenever Mark took me down the mine, he always said, "I know this mine well." Now that I think about it, he was familiar with more than just the roads. The radio station in the center of the mine began to buzz again. I crawled over, and my knees hurt from the rusty shell. The switch knob was stuck in the on position, and was so rusted that I couldn't get my fingernail in. I took out a flat-blade screwdriver from the toolkit and pried along the gap. The sound of metal friction was so sharp that it hurt my ears. "Elder sister." The sound came from beside his feet. I looked down and saw a little boy squatting there, his face covered in coal dust, but his eyes were frighteningly bright. His overalls were a little too short, revealing muddy ankles, the same pattern as the overalls on the antenna. "We haven't left yet." He moved closer to me. "Can you hear me?" The back of my neck started to feel hot again, as if someone was scraping it with a red-hot wire. I gritted my teeth and touched my phone, my thumb sliding across the screen quickly. My mother's voice memo popped up, and the rustling sound of white noise exploded like a sudden rainstorm. The little boy's figure swayed and merged into the rock wall. I took the opportunity to pry open the radio casing with a screwdriver, and the metal piece fell to the ground with a bang. The structure inside stunned me. Where the electronic components should have been, there were 17 dry cell batteries stacked up, connected in series with copper wires and wrapped in faded tape. On the top battery, Lee Thompson 1999.5.17 was written crookedly in red paint. That was the day the mining disaster occurred. "Emergency power," I said to the air. When they were trapped underground, they removed all the batteries they could find, hoping to hold on a little longer and send out a distress signal. But the signal could not be transmitted, and despair and resentment seeped into the electromagnetic waves and turned into what it is now. The mine suddenly shook violently. The gravel above my head fell down, and I could hear the sound of someone kicking on the door in the distance. "Brian," someone shouted, "there's someone inside. Don't destroy hope." It was Irene's voice, as sharp as nails scratching a blackboard. "That's our family." I looked up and saw that the stone door was shaking, and a few beams of flashlight leaked in through the gaps. The shadows of the townspeople twisted on the rock wall like a group of monsters with bared fangs and claws. The radio's indicator light was flashing wildly, and the green light was so blinding that it was impossible to open your eyes. My temples were throbbing, and my eyes were full of double vision. The hammer in the toolkit was digging at my thigh, so I grabbed it and aimed it at the battery stack at the core of the radio. "They should have left long ago," I shouted, my voice so hoarse that it didn't sound like my own. "They are not your hope, but your curse." With the first blow of the hammer, the battery shell cracked and black powder sprayed out. With the second hammer, sparks flew from the copper wire. With the third hammer, all 17 batteries were broken into pieces, mixed with rust and red paint, and scattered all over the floor. All sound suddenly disappeared. The mine was eerily quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat hitting my ribs. I slumped down on the ground, my back pressed against the cold rock wall. Mark groaned in the corner, and there was no movement from the stone gate. Had the townspeople left? Still, "Thank you." The voice came from deep in the skull, like someone speaking into your ear. It was a man's voice, a little hoarse, and mixed with the noise of electricity. Finally, someone heard it. I looked up suddenly. The indicator light of the radio went out, but the skull on the antenna was still there. The sending key in the eye socket had fallen to the ground, flashing a faint light. The burning sensation at the back of my neck had subsided, but my temples were still throbbing. I fished out Mark's brass key and put it in my trouser pocket. The note was softened by sweat, and the words, "They are not dead, they are just still waiting," were blurred into a red color. There was the sound of wind outside the mine tunnel, blowing in fine sand. I stood up by holding on to the wall. My tool bag was heavy, and the hammer was still covered in battery powder. Mark moved, and I picked up his shotgun, the safety on. There is still a long way out. But now, I heard a clearer sound, not an illusion, not a signal, but the suppressed, trembling breathing coming from my own throat. And that whisper was still floating in the skull, like a thin needle, gently poking the nerves. The bright sunlight outside the mine made me squint. My left hand was still holding the shotgun, and the barrel made a crackling sound as it scraped against the rock wall. The sound reminded me of my mother's white noise tapes, clicking like an old-fashioned fan. I looked down at my watch. Only 2 hours had passed since I went down to the mine, but the sweat on the back of my neck had already soaked through my collar. My temple was still throbbing, as if someone was twisting my nerves with a thin wire. The words, "finally someone heard it," kept ringing in my ears. Sometimes it was a male voice, sometimes mixed with a child's sobs. Could it be an illusion? But I didn't dare tell anyone. The way the townspeople looked at the contaminated people was too familiar. When old Sheriff John raised his shotgun and shouted "Monster," the grocery store clerk he identified had only broken a bottle of jam. There were broken bricks piled on the slope at the entrance of the mine, and I slipped when I stepped on it. I looked up and saw the steeple of the church in Silver Creek Town. The bronze bell on the bell tower was tilted to one side. When I first arrived in the town 3 days ago, it was still striking the time on the hour. The whole town was unusually quiet now. Not even a dog was barking. As I turned the last ridge, I almost ran into Irene. Her blue apron was stained with mud, and her usually neatly tied curly hair was in tangles, like a tangled mess. "You ruined hope." She stared at me. Her pupils shrunk to the size of pinpoints, but they're still waiting. I took a half step back, the shotgun weighing heavily on my arm. Irene suddenly took out a photo from her apron pocket. The corners of the photo were curled with hair. In the photo, 17 men in work clothes were crowded at the entrance of a mine. The tall miner in the middle had a copper key pendant hanging on his chest, almost exactly the same as the one on Mark's waistband. "He is my brother." Irene dug her fingers into the edge of the photo. On the day of the mine disaster, he said that when the radio was repaired, he would be able to hear us calling his name. Her voice suddenly became lighter, like ashes blown away by the wind. Now that the radio is gone, he must be so lonely. My throat tightened. Mark's brass key was still in my trouser pocket, hurting my thigh. That day in the hotel, he drunkenly tapped the key and said, "This is the old lock from Area B of the mine." Now that I think about it, the red paint stuck in the keyhole is exactly the same color as the skeleton's fingernails on the radio antenna. Simple. Someone pulled my arm. It was Lisa. The library door was half open. She pulled me in and locked the bolt behind her. Her nails dug into my flesh, colder than the rock walls in the mine. Don't believe their hope. I tried to use the town annals to check the records of mining accidents. The last 2 pages were torn out of all the files. She fished a portable radio from her canvas bag and turned the knob rapidly. Suddenly, a sharp whistle seeped out from the noise of the electric current, and the frequency was exactly the same as the previous strange radio station. I tuned in 27 channels this morning. Lisa's voice was shaking. "Only this frequency can penetrate all the shielding." She turned off the radio, and the metal casing was so hot that it could have burned red. "It's not destroyed. It's just hidden." There was a sound of banging on the door outside the window. I looked out through the glass. Brian was holding a pickaxe, followed by 8 townspeople. Tony from the butcher's shop, Lucy from the post office, and even the apprentice from the grocery store who showed me the way yesterday. Their eyes were red, like skinned rabbits. "Restart the station." Brian pounded on the wooden door of the radio station with his pickaxe. "It can save us. It can save them." Lisa put her hand on my shoulder. There was a truck carrying timber entering the winding mountain road outside the town half an hour ago. Now, she swallowed. Now all the cars are parked at the intersection. The drivers are sitting in the driver's seat, staring at the radio on the dashboard. I fished out the white noise player from my toolkit, a legacy from my mother before she died, which contained a 440 Hz recording of buzzing and ocean waves. When I turned on the switch, the sound of electric current poured into my ears, like a layer of ice covering my hot brain. "I need your car," I said to Lisa. "That silver Ford parked in the alley behind the library, right?" Lisa's pupils suddenly contracted, and she nodded immediately. She fished the car keys out of her apron, the metal teeth leaving white marks on her palms. "The tank is full, and the spare key is behind the sun visor. But Jane..." Her voice suddenly choked. "If the radio comes on again on the way..." "I know," I interrupted her. The whisper in the mine was still crawling in the cracks between my nerves, now mixed with the white noise and turning into a rustling friction sound. I tucked the shotgun into my lower back and went through my toolkit. Hammer, wrench, white noise player, Mark's brass key, and the photo Erin had given me. The sound of banging on the door from the direction of the radio station became louder. Brian's pickaxe had already dug a hole, through which he could see the old-fashioned broadcasting equipment inside. 3 days ago I was still debugging its signal amplifier, and now its knob was turning by itself, and the pointer was sweeping across the dial frantically. "Let's go." Lisa pushed me towards the back door. There were several boxes of expired books piled up in the back alley. I kicked over one of the boxes. As the pages flew up, I caught a glimpse of the words Yinshi Town Mine Disaster Special Issue printed on the cover. The publication date was July 15th, 2003, exactly the day after the mine disaster occurred 20 years ago. The sound of a Ford engine exploded in the alley. Lisa huddled in the passenger seat, twisting her fingers around the seatbelt. "Go south, and you'll be out of town after the third bend." She glanced at the rearview mirror and suddenly froze. "They're chasing us." I stepped on the accelerator. In the rearview mirror, Brian's pickaxe reflected the sunlight. Tony held up a butcher's boning knife, and Irene's blue apron was blown by the wind like a faded flag. The tires rolled over gravel, and the chassis hit the raised road surface. I heard a clicking sound coming from the back seat. It was the radio that Lisa had left on the back seat and had been turned on at some point. The noise of electricity poured into the car. I reached out to turn it off, but the knob started turning by itself. The man's voice seeped out from the speaker, mixed with 17 overlapping breaths. "Thank you." Finally, someone heard it. Lisa's hand grasped my wrist. Her nails left crescent marks on my skin, but I stared at the radio frequency on the dashboard. It was exactly the same as the scale on the old radio in the mine. The curve of the winding mountain road unfolds before our eyes. I gripped the steering wheel, the white noise player throbbing in my pocket. In the rearview mirror, the shadows of the townspeople were getting smaller and smaller, but the sound of the radio was getting clearer and clearer, as if someone was speaking to the back of my neck. "Don't leave, we haven't finished talking yet." The tires scraped against the guardrail on the side of the road, making a sharp scream. Lisa's breath sprayed behind my ear. "Quick, quick." I stepped on the accelerator. The engine roared as it rushed up the curve, but just as the view passed the ridge, the noise from the radio suddenly turned into a shriek. The man's voice was heard above everything else, clear as if he were sitting in the back seat. "They said you could hear it, that you'd get us out." I yanked the steering wheel. The tires left charred marks on the ground, but the sound was still there, coming in from the speakers, from the skull, and from every breeze. Lisa's hands were shaking as she pointed at the dashboard. The frequency needle stopped at a certain number that completely coincided with the last reading of the mine radio. Behind the ridge, the wooden sign marking the town boundary flashed by. I stared at the road ahead, but out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of the passenger side radio. Its indicator light was glowing a dim green, like the eye sockets of skeletons on a mine antenna. "It's still there," Lisa said suddenly. Her voice was so soft it sounded like a sigh. "It followed us." I stepped on the accelerator. The wind blew in through the car window, making the photos Irene had given her rustle. The miner's brass key pendant in the photo gleamed in the sun and made a slight sound when it collided with Mark's key in my pocket. 17 voices sounded simultaneously amid the electric sound of the radio. This time I heard clearly that they didn't say thank you but keep up. As the tires rolled over the last stretch of gravel, the dashboard radio suddenly made a crackling sound. Lisa's nails were still pinching my wrist, cold as ice. "Why is it still following us?" Her voice was shaking, and her pupils shrank to pinpoints in the rearview mirror. "We just passed the boundary sign." I didn't say anything. My palms were sweaty as I wheeled the steering wheel, and my temples were throbbing. I should have understood when I touched the antenna of the old radio station from the mine. Those entangled bones, those overlapping breaths, they are not stuck in the signals, but in the gaps between my bones. The white noise player was vibrating in my pocket, as if reminding me, "Do you think it's a protective cover? No, it is a ruler." measuring the distance between you and madness. The map was spread out in Lisa's lap, with Brainard Cabin circled in red. 3 days ago, the old sheriff said, as he flipped through the phone number with shaking hands, that lunatic ran away 10 years ago, but the notebook he kept of the strange things that happened after the mine disaster is thicker than the church Bible. The cabin was hidden in the pine forest, with thin smoke rising from the chimney. I knocked 3 times on the door, and the latch clicked. The old man who opened the door had hair as white as snow. His left eye was covered with a black cloth, but there was a fire burning in his right eye. "Jane Mason," he said first, his voice like sandpaper grinding metal. "A signalman from town with a white noise machine, just like the families of the miners 20 years ago." Lisa pulled my sleeve. "How do you know we—" "Radio." He turned sideways. There were 7 or 8 old radios hanging on the wall of the wooden house. "From the time you passed the third bend, the frequency reached my place. Come in." There was a yellowed file on the wooden table, with the cover reading Psychological Intervention Records after the Yinshi Mine Disaster 2003. Carl opened the first page. The man in the photo had red eyes and a smile on his face. "This is Tom Harris, the husband of a survivor of the mining accident. He said that every night at 3 o'clock in the morning, he could hear his deceased wife counting the seconds in his ear." A few seconds. Lisa leaned in to take a closer look. "Count to 60, then jump off the cliff." Carl turned to the second page. The time of death on the autopsy report was 3:01 a.m. He wasn't the first. I treated 7 that year. 4 committed suicide, 2 went crazy, and the last one, he pointed to his eye patch, hit my eyes with a wrench and shouted, "They said you were stealing our voices." I fished out the key from my trouser pocket. Mark's key. He was only 17 years old when the mine disaster happened. The copper miner's logo on the keychain was shiny from being touched. So this isn't a ghost. It's resonance. Carl took out a spectrum analyzer from the drawer. A sawtooth wave jumped on the screen. The human brain has its own frequency. Sadness, fear, despair. These emotions will vibrate like sound waves. During the mine disaster, 17 people were crammed 300 meters underground, with only 5 minutes of power left. Their fear, cries for help, and unwillingness, all of them were squeezed into the same frequency, and were welded to death in the electromagnetic wave. He called up an old recording, and a scream suddenly broke out amid the electrical noise. "Wife, daughter, save me." Then there were 17 overlapping gasps, as if 17 people put their mouths to the microphone at the same time. "Now, this frequency has caught up with you, because you can hear it." He tapped the white noise machine in my pocket. "When your mother used this thing to treat your childhood trauma, did she find that you were particularly sensitive to abnormal sound waves?" My throat tightened. "When I was 12 years old, there was a thunderstorm, and I was huddled in the closet shivering. My mother turned on the white noise machine, and the sound of rain was mixed with faint sobs. She said at the time, 'Jane, what you heard was not a ghost. It was your brain translating noise. But now those noises have names. It's Mark shouting, 'Mom, it hurts.' It's the cries for help during the mine disaster mentioned by the old sheriff. And it's the 'save me' hidden under the lipstick written 'go' when Ruth stuffed the water bottle into my hand. That's why it follows me." I touched the back of my neck, where a rash had remained since I returned from the mines, because my brain became its megaphone. Carl nodded. "Just like a radio station needs an antenna. You are the antenna." Late at night, the stove in the cabin crackled. I wrapped myself in the blanket Lisa had borrowed and stared at the shadows of the pine trees on the ceiling. Just as I was about to fall asleep, something touched my face. It's that little boy. His face was covered in coal dust, and his eyes were as bright as 2 stars, exactly like Mark in the photo of him as a child in the mine. "Sister, if you don't leave, we can talk together." His voice was like soaking in warm water. "Listen, they all want to talk." I opened my mouth and my throat felt sweet. "You can continue talking." Bite. The sound of my cell phone alert woke me up. The screen was on. The recording software stopped at 0023. and the play button automatically jumped to completed. I clicked play with trembling hands, and my own voice emerged from the speaker, a little breathy, as if I were talking in my sleep. "You can continue talking." Lisa sat up from the sofa. "Jane, what are you talking about?" I turned off my phone, cold sweat soaking my back. The moonlight outside the window shone on the spectrum analyzer, and the light from the screen reflected Carl's face. He was not asleep, and was staring at me. "The only way is to cover it with white noise." He handed over a metal box. "My improved high-intensity sound wave generator can shatter the signal in your brain. But," he paused, "it may shatter more than just the signal. Hearing damage is considered mild. If it is serious, will it turn into Tom Harris?" I took out the recorder and pressed the red button. "Or will it turn into the person under the eye patch?" Lisa grabbed my hand. "Jane, don't be silly. Did you hear yourself talking in your sleep? It has begun to control you." "It doesn't control me." I pulled my hand back, the red light of the recorder blinking in the darkness. "It just needs someone to talk to." Carl's spectrometer suddenly made a sharp beep. I looked down and saw that the sawtooth wave on the screen was deforming and slowly overlapping with the frequency of my recorder. Lisa's breathing became rapid. "What are you doing?" "Record a frequency of your own." I put the recorder close to my ear, and I could hear my own heartbeat, mixed with the faint sound of 17 gentle thank you. Amid the sound of pine trees outside the window, I heard Mark's voice, which was clearer than during the day. "Sister, listen, our voices have become better." The red light of the recorder is still flashing. I stared at it, and suddenly remembered the antenna of the old radio station in the mine. The bones were not entangled, but they were entangled by themselves, as if to say, "Look, we finally have a place to talk." Carl's white noise generator cast a shadow on the table. I reached out to touch it, then pulled back. "I'll think about it tomorrow," I said, stuffing the recorder under my pillow. The moonlight shines through the window lattice and draws a square on the wall, like the dial of an old radio. I closed my eyes, and this time I didn't hear any screams. Instead, I heard 17 voices, softly, as if humming a song without words. The recorder under the pillow is still recording. It's waiting for me. I was awakened by the vibration of the spectrum analyzer. At 3:17 in the morning, the waveform image on the screen twisted into a twisted snake. I took out the recorder from under my pillow and pressed the play button. My own voice mixed with 17 thank yous just happened to coincide with the sawtooth wave on the spectrum analyzer. Carl jumped up from the sofa, and the eye mask slid down to the bridge of his nose. "You didn't sleep at all last night?" "They are asleep." I pushed the spectrum analyzer over to me, "but they are not asleep either." I ran my finger across the overlapping waveforms on the screen. "This is the frequency of the distress telegram from the year of the mine disaster. I found it in the town archives." Lisa came over, wrapped in a blanket, her hair stained with the sofa fluff. "So, the rhythm is different." I compared the two audio clips. The distress message was short, long, short, SOS, and this one, I pressed play, and the 17 thank yous sounded like a string of stars blown away by the wind. It's short, short, long. In Morse code, short, short, long means listen. Carl's fingers grabbed the edge of the spectrum analyzer. "Are you crazy? That's the frequency of the curse." "It's not a curse." I closed the comparison interface. "They are saying listen." My throat suddenly tightened, and I thought of the skeleton entangled in the mine antenna. Those hand bones were all facing the direction of the radio station, as if pointing at something. 20 years ago, they used the last battery power to send an SOS, but no one heard it. Now they are sending listen, because finally someone can hear it. Lisa grabbed my wrist. "Come with me. Let's go to Carl's clinic and use white noise to wash away these ghosts. Flush them." I pulled my hand back, my wrist banging against the corner of the table. The old sheriff said he was on the top of the mountain when the mine disaster happened, and he heard a crying child on the radio. When Ruth secretly gave me water, The bottle said go, but her hand was shaking, as if she was writing stay. I pointed out the window, where the moonlight shone on the empty main street. They're not attacking people who want to leave. They're begging people who want to leave not to leave, because if they leave, no one will listen to them. Carl took off his eye patch, revealing a cloudy gray in his left eye. I have seen 3 contaminated people with this eye. The first one tore out his tongue and said, "It's too loud." The second one pointed a gun at his ear and said, "They are coming out." The third one, his Adam's apple moved, was my wife. She finally said, "So they are saying sorry." I remembered the old radio station in the mine. Among the skeletons entangled in the antenna was a very small one. It belonged to a 12-year-old boy, Mark, the last name on the list of victims of the mine disaster in the town annals. Mark said last night, "Sister, our voices have gotten better." I took out the recorder and put it against my chest. They don't mean to hurt anyone. They're just too lonely, so lonely that they can only use screaming to prove their existence. Lisa suddenly rushed over to grab the recorder. I moved to the side, and her nails scratched the back of my hand, burning it. "Jane." Her eyes were red. "When your mother used white noise to treat your childhood trauma, didn't she teach you not to empathize with ghosts?" I didn't say anything. He turned around, locked the door, and put the key in her hand. There was a note on the coffee table, which I wrote before going to bed. "I want to go back, not to repair the signal, but to reconnect with the forgotten voice. Don't look for me. It's useless even if you find me." I was already in the truck when Lisa banged on the door behind me. The car radio automatically jumped to another channel, and amidst the crackling noise, a clear thank you suddenly came out. I smiled and stepped on the accelerator. The road sign for Silver Creek Town glowed cold white in the morning light. The last time I came, the mailbox at the entrance of the town was smashed to pieces, but now it is quiet. Maybe the polluted townspeople have gone to the radio station. The iron door of the radio station was ajar. I pushed open the door, and the smell of mold and rust came out. The control console was covered in dust, and the old radio was still in the corner, with the antenna hanging down like a tired snake. I plugged the recorder into the backup power port. When the red indicator light came on, the back of my neck suddenly felt hot. It was Mark's voice, whispering in my ear, "Sister, it's about to start." The moment I pressed the play button, the whole room vibrated. The waveform of the spectrum analyzer suddenly stretched out into gentle waves, like wind blowing through a wheat field. There were footsteps outside the window. I leaned my head out and saw Brian, the lumberjack who had chased me with a shovel yesterday, now standing in the middle of the street with the shovel hanging at his feet, his face the calmest I had ever seen. The kitchen knife Mrs. Irene was holding fell to the ground. She squatted down and gently touched the blade, as if she was touching her grandson's face. 17 voices suddenly rang out in the headphones, overlapping but clear. There were the coughs of old miners, the untuned whistles of young men, and the off-tune nursery rhymes hummed by Mark, exactly the same song without lyrics that I heard last night. "I told you I would listen to you," I whispered into the microphone. The sound in the headphones suddenly became softer, as if someone was gently covering their mouth. But I know they are still there, in every breeze, in every pine wave, in the breath of every town resident. I took a last look at the console, and the time showed 7:17 in the morning. I took off my headphones and put them in the drawer of the old radio. When the metal drawer closed, there was a click sound, like a gentle goodbye. As the truck drove back onto the winding mountain road, the town of Yinshi in the rearview mirror was fading in the morning mist. The main street was deserted, except for a thin wisp of smoke rising from the radio station chimney, like a finger pointing toward the sky. I turned down the car's air conditioning. The wind blew in, carrying the scent of pine needles. This time, I didn't turn off the radio. When I parked my truck at the entrance of town, the gravel crunched under my tires. Yinshi was unusually calm. The few townspeople who were smashing mailboxes when he left last time were now nowhere to be seen. The old light bulb at the entrance of the radio station was emitting a dim glow, like a mark left by someone on purpose. When I opened the door, the smell of mildew and rust hit me. The dust covering the console had been swept away, and in the middle was a piece of paper with crooked handwriting, as if written in the left hand. You heard them, didn't you? The signature was William Gray. My hand, holding the note, paused. He was the only survivor of a mine disaster 20 years ago, and he had thrown a lump of coal at my toolkit just last month. Sudden itching at the back of the neck. I tugged at my collar and felt the pale pink scar on the back of my neck. I got the burn when my mom used a white noise machine to treat my nightmares when I was a child, but now it has become a strange scale. The closer I get to the sound of a mining accident, the more itchy the scar becomes. The backup power interface is at the bottom of the console. When I squatted down to plug in the cable, I heard the sound of brakes outside. You don't need to look to know it's Carl. That guy has been following me for 3 days, from Vancouver to the Rocky Mountains. Yesterday, he blocked me at the door of the hotel and said things like, "You are polluted, and don't be a savior." "Lisa," Carl's voice came from the street, with a little crack. "She is not saving people. Those signals are parasites that will turn the townspeople into receivers." My hand paused on the power button. Lisa's voice was very soft, like a dandelion blown away by the wind, but we really couldn't hear them for too long. The moment the power is turned on, the lights on the console light up one by one. I plugged the recorder into the transmitter module, and the red indicator light started flashing. The scar on the back of my neck was so hot that it felt like someone had pressed a cigarette butt against it. Mark's voice rang in my ears again. It was the illusion of my brother who died young, which only I could hear. "Sister, they are waiting for you." "William?" I didn't turn around, staring at the jumping peaks of the spectrum analyzer. "Stand up." There were shuffling footsteps in the shadows. The old miner's overalls were stained with coal dust, and he held a peeling recorder in his hand. I heard it the moment you drove the truck onto the winding mountain road. He pressed the play button, and a vague knocking sound was mixed in with the noise of the current. Bang, 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 the muffled sound of a pick hitting the rock wall. "Help, there is only half an hour of oxygen left." The young man's voice was filled with tears. "Old Zhang, remember this for me. My daughter turns 1 year old today." My throat tightened. This is exactly the same song without words I recorded at the hotel last night, only clearer. William's hands were shaking, and he almost dropped the recorder. When I escaped 20 years ago, I forgot my mining lamp underground. Their voices are all stored on the backup chip in the lamp. There were footsteps outside the window. I looked up and saw Mrs. Irene standing in the middle of the street, with a ball of yarn instead of the kitchen knife in her hand. It was the one her grandson had left at the grocery store last winter. Brian's shovel hung at his side, his knuckles still stained with rosin, as he gently touched the rose bushes by the roadside. "You said you would listen to us." Irene's voice was like a leaf falling on the water. "So what now?" Now, I pressed the transmitter button, and low-frequency waves poured out from the antenna like a black mist. "Let them talk now." "Jane." Carl broke open the door of the radio station and rushed over to pull out the cable. I was prepared and took out a white noise player from my toolkit and threw it over. Amid the sound of the electric current, he staggered 2 steps, covered his ears and squatted down. "You are crazy. This will spread the pollution." "It's not diffusion." I stared at the stretched waveform on the spectrum analyzer, like the wind blowing through the wheat field. "It's resonance. Their despair needs to be heard, and the townspeople's pain also needs to be responded to." I bent down to pick up Carl's dropped psychiatrist license. In the photo, he was dressed in a suit and tie. "You've treated so many people with post-traumatic stress disorder. Don't you understand? Suppressed voices will only counterattack more crazily." Carl said nothing. The footsteps outside the window were getting closer and closer. The townspeople gathered outside the radio station, looking up at the antenna. Mrs. Irene dropped her ball of yarn to the ground. She looked up, tears streaming down her wrinkles. It was old Lee's cough. He always said the ginger tea I made was too hot. William suddenly knelt down. The old miner's shoulders were shaking violently, and the knocking sounds in the recorder were still ringing. Dong dong. This time there were more sounds mixed in. Some were whistling, some were humming nursery rhymes, and some were shouting "Mom." The waveform graphs of the spectrum analyzer are connected together, like 17 hands drawing a picture together. The scar on the back of my neck suddenly stopped feeling hot. I leaned against the console and watched the morning mist creep in through the windows. Carl stood beside me at some point, staring at the townspeople's gradually relaxing faces, and whispered, "They are laughing." Yes. Brian touched the rose bush, picked a red one and pinned it on his chest. Mrs. Ruth took out a biscuit barrel from the grocery store and distributed it to the children who gathered around. Old Sheriff John Carter touched his non-existent gun and hummed Red River Valley. At 3 in the morning, as I fell asleep on the console, the last thing I heard was Mark's voice. "Sister," they said, "thank you." The next morning, I was awakened by the sound of typing on the keyboard. I opened my eyes blearily and saw Mrs. Irene sitting in front of the console. Her white hair dyed golden by the morning light. Her fingers danced lightly on the keys, as if she was playing the piano. "Mrs. Irene," I rubbed my eyes. She didn't look back. There was a rustling sound of electricity coming from the radio, mixed with the vague sound of 17 overlapping, calm, and finally heard. Human voice. I was awakened by the sound of the keyboard. There was a red mark on the back of his neck, and the metal edges of the console hurt his ribs. Mrs. Irene's white hair looked pale gold in the morning light as she sat up, rubbing her eyes. She had her back to me, her fingers hovering above the keys, as if she was playing a tune that only she could hear. "Mrs. Irene," I called her hoarsely. She didn't look back. The blue light of the monitor flickered on her face, and she spoke slowly. "I remember that day." Her Adam's apple rolled. "My husband went to rescue people. He said he heard someone calling his name, saying, 'Old Walker, give me a hand.'" She suddenly laughed, then quickly pursed her lips. When he left, the mining lamp was still on. I chased him out and told him to bring a thick coat. Her voice suddenly choked. Then he never came back. I fished out the metal wrench from my toolkit and turned it mindlessly. This has been a problem I've had since I was a child. When I'm anxious, I always have to touch something hard. There were 2 knocks on the door of the radio station. William leaned in half with his hat brim pulled down. "The screws on the relay tower are loose. We have to fix it before noon." He shook the socket in his hand, and his knuckles were still stained with motor oil from helping me fix the antenna last night. I tucked the wrench into my belt and followed him outside. The mountain breeze brought in the smell of pine needles. William's rubber shoes stepped on gravel. After the mine disaster that year, the rescue team went down. He suddenly said, "They said they heard the sound of a telegraph ticking, like someone was sending a signal. We thought they were survivors, but when the people who went down came back, they all held their heads and shouted that there were bugs crawling in their ears." He stopped and turned around, and the brim of his hat slid to the back of his head. Later I found out there was no such thing as a call for help. It was, he pursed his lips, it was their last breath before they died, stuck in their throats and couldn't come out. The relay tower is at the east end of the town. William supported him from below as he climbed the ladder. The frequency you tuned yesterday made old Lee's coughing sound come through. His voice was muffled. I heard my apprentice little Tom yell, "Master, I'm cold." He was only 17 years old and had just received his first salary on the day of the accident. As I tightened the last screw, he fished out a piece of hard candy from his pocket. "Here you go. Mrs. Ruth gave it to me this morning, saying that girls who repair machines need to boost their blood sugar." When I returned to the radio station, the door was ajar. I took out the electrician's knife from my trouser pocket and slid in along the door frame. Maya Rodriguez holds up her phone with the camera facing the console. The jacket she was wearing was still covered in mud, and it was obvious that she had come over the back mountain. "Who are you?" She pressed the pause button. "Why can you control this thing?" I didn't respond, but stared at the screen of her phone. In the picture, my hand was on the FM knob, and the background sound was 17 overlapping voices, like the wind blowing through a pine forest. I'm not controlling it. I pulled at my sleeves, which were stained with motor oil. I'm letting it speak. She narrowed her eyes. Talking. Those 17 voices. Yes. I bent down and picked up the recorder at her feet. They have been shouting in the mine for 20 years, and now someone finally heard them. Maya's phone suddenly lit up. She looked down at the message and her face changed. Brian is having a meeting in the basement of the tavern. He said you were using evil radio waves to brainwash people, and that you were going to bring people to seize the radio station. I put the recorder in her hand and said, "Take this, and go to the convenience store at the entrance of town. If I'm not out in half an hour, send the contents to your editor." She didn't move. "You hurry up." I pushed her and turned to lock the door of the radio station. The red light on the console was flashing. I pulled up the spectrum graph from last night. Brian's brainwave curve was sharper than others, like a knife piercing paper. Suddenly I remembered that the day before yesterday outside the church, when he was holding a pitchfork and shouting at me, "Get out," he was muttering, "I heard it. I heard you want my help." It turned out that he was not more polluted, but he took the initiative to respond to the call for help. I took out the white noise player and turned up the frequency. The sound of electricity was mixed with a buzzing sound, like the noise of an old radio searching for channels. The faces of the townspeople flashed by in the surveillance video. Mrs. Ruth put down the radio knob she had been holding for 3 days. Old Sheriff John replaced his non-existent service gun with a grasshopper he made for his grandson. Only Brian's group was still gathered at the door of the tavern, and some of them picked up shovels. "You may listen," I whispered into the microphone, my hand on the frequency knob, "but you do not have to obey." The voltmeter on the console suddenly shook. I leaned in closer and saw that the scale of the lowest threshold was glowing coldly in the morning light. It's time to adjust. As soon as my fingertips touched the knob, the sound of glass breaking was heard outside. "Jane Mason." Brian's roar slammed against the door. "You think we dare not break down the door?" I looked down at my watch. 28 minutes left. He took a last look at Mrs. Irene. She had stood up at some point and was tucking a lock of white hair behind her ear. The light from the monitor illuminated her face, and this time she was smiling. The moment the knob was turned, the lights in the entire radio station went out. In the darkness, I felt for the wrench on my belt. As I counted to 3 heartbeats in the dark, the tip of the wrench struck the metal console. The banging on the door outside suddenly stopped. There were footsteps coming in through the crack in the door. It was Brian's heavy breathing, mixed with the smell of rust and blood. He had cut the back of his hand with a shovel the day before and hadn't treated it. "Jane." It was Mrs. Ruth's voice, a little trembling. Then the noise is gone. I felt for the emergency light switch on the wall. As the dim light spread, the surveillance screen lit up. The townspeople crowded outside the radio station, shovels dangling and pitchforks stuck in the mud. Brian's face was pressed against the glass, his pupils still contracted, like a cat stung by strong light. "You heard it." He suddenly turned around and grabbed the collar of the young man next to him. "That's the old sheriff's grandson, and he helped me move equipment last week." The boy didn't struggle. He looked at the snow-capped mountains in the distance, and the corners of his mouth slowly curled up. "My mother called me home for dinner." He pointed to his ear. "It's right here," as softly as when she called me before. Mrs. Ruth cried. A photo fell out of her apron pocket. It was a family photo from 20 years ago. Her husband was wearing a miner's uniform, standing at the entrance of the mine and smiling. The console buzzer sounded. Mrs. Irene stood next to me at some point, holding a notebook in her hand. Her white hair shone silver under the light, the same color as the townspeople who were looking up at the sky in the surveillance video. "The frequency is stable." She slapped the notebook on the back of my hand. "The minimum threshold is only high enough for people who want to hear it." On the notebook was a crooked list of names. These people can still hear it, but they need a psychiatrist, not a shotgun. I turn to the second page. The first line is the old sheriff's name, with a grasshopper drawn behind it. He was still touching his gun in the air yesterday, and now he should be making this up for his grandson. I'll stay. William came out of the storage room with a faded miner's jacket draped over his shoulders. He pointed to the spectrum graph in the surveillance video and said, "They have been shouting for 20 years. Someone has to remember it." He suddenly smiled, with oil in the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. "But you should leave. The noise in this place should not trap you." I looked down at the toolkit. The clanking sound of a metal wrench hitting a screwdriver. This is the sound I have been using every time I feel anxious since I was 16. Now they are quiet, like a group of tired little animals. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I walked towards the town entrance with my tool bag on my back. As we passed the pub, Brian's old suitcase was leaning against the steps. The door was not closed tightly, and I could see him squatting on the ground, stuffing the mining lamp into the box. It was his father's miner's lamp, which had been buried at the bottom of the mine, along with 17 skeletons 20 years ago, and which he dug out 3 days ago. "Want a ride?" he suddenly asked, his voice as hoarse as sandpaper scraping against sheet metal. I shook my head. The winding mountain road glowed white in the moonlight, like a faded bandage. We were all wrong. He didn't look up, his fingers picking at the cracks in the miner's lamp. It's not that they want to control us. It's that we're too afraid of not being able to hear. I kept walking. I heard the sound of a suitcase being dragged behind me. Once, twice, and finally it was blown away by the wind. Maya's laptop is lit up at the convenience store. She put her feet up on the counter. On the screen were 17 overlapping sound wave graphs, like 17 intertwined hands. "I've thought of a title." She hit enter. "The Whisperer of Silverbrook." She twirled the pen. "At the end, right? We always think the sound comes from far away, but in fact it has been hidden deep in our ears, waiting for someone to wake it up." I took a closer look. The last paragraph she wrote at 2 in the morning. When the woman in overalls turned the knob, 17 screams floated up from the bottom of the mine 20 years ago, gently falling on the ears of everyone who was willing to listen. They finally didn't have to scream for help anymore, nor did they have to cover their ears and run away. "Send it." I patted her shoulder. As she pressed the send button, the mountain peaks in the east began to turn pale. The convenience store radio suddenly started to sound by itself, with the clearest FM sound, like the wind blowing through a pine forest. Maya's phone vibrated. She looked down, her eyes suddenly widened. There are 27 unread messages, all from the editorial group. I picked up my tool bag and headed for the intersection. In the morning mist, the bus going out of town had its yellow lights on. The wind blew pine needles across my face, but I didn't hide this time. Those faint whispers are still there, like my mother's soft humming when she used a white noise machine to lull me to sleep. Finally, they don't have to scream anymore. When the bus started, I took out my cell phone. A pop-up window popped up on the News AP. In-depth report. The Whisperer of Silver Creek Town topped the trending search list. I turned off the screen. Outside the window, the outline of Yinshi Town faded into a shadow in the fog. But I know that those voices are still there, quietly, waiting for the next person who is willing to listen. The bus had just turned the third corner when my cell phone began to vibrate painfully in my overalls pocket. I took it out and found it was a missed call from Irene, with a text message. "The federal people have arrived and are at the radio station." The driver made a sharp turn in the steering wheel. "Girl, you want to get off?" He glanced at the rearview mirror. "There's a fork in the road ahead where you can stop a pickup truck heading back to town." I slung my tool bag over my shoulder. The wind blew pine needles across my face, but I didn't dodge this time. The whispers were still there, like the hum from my mother's white noise machine, only clearer than yesterday. I was running up the stairs when the wooden door of the radio station was slammed. The man in the suit had his back to me and was drumming his fingers on the console. You are sending unknown frequencies to the entire country. Mr. Clemente, FCC. His tie was askew to his collarbone when he turned around, as if he had run all the way from the airport. According to Maya Rodriguez, the signal coverage here has suddenly tripled. Irene straightened up at the operating table. The bruises on her eyes were heavier than they were 3 days ago. She winked at me and clicked the mouse on the computer screen. A new clip marked 04117 AM was added to the audio file list. Want to listen? She pressed the play button. A mechanical sound emerged from the sound of electricity, like rusty gears rolling over a tape, repeating, "We are listening. We are also speaking." You adjusted it. Irene's voice trembled, her fingertips pinching into her palms. I shook my head, feeling a chill on the back of my neck. This was not like the previous broken cries for help, but more like it had been translated by something, as if someone had stuffed 17 screams into a talking machine. When the door was pushed open, William's mining lamp was so bright that people couldn't open their eyes. He held up the spectrum analyzer, and the wavy lines on the screen twisted into a ball, like a spider web that had been trampled. The signal source is not at the radio station. He panted heavily. I was staring at the spectrum analyzer during the night shift, and the pulse suddenly ran in the direction of the mine. After chasing it, he swallowed. The instrument shows that something is responding. Response. Daniel tugged at his tie. Response to what? Us. I touched the metal buckle of the tool bag, and the clinking sound made my heart beat more steadily. The voices of the miners. Now they are not screaming for help, but talking. Irene's fingers flew across the keyboard, calling up yesterday's sonogram. The 17 waves, which originally looked like tangled snakes, now have distinct lines, and each wave collides gently with the crests and troughs next to it. After Maya's report was published, 200,000 people said I heard it in the comment section. She opened her phone, and the screen was full of messages. I suddenly woke up at 3 in the morning and heard someone say, "We are listening." My grandmother said the voice sounded like her deceased son, a miner. Daniel's face darkened. So you are deliberately expanding the frequency, using the whole country as a test site. It's not intentional. I squatted in front of the old metal cabinet in the basement, rubbing my hands with rust. It may be related to this. In the bottom drawer was a yellow drawing with several holes gnawed on the edges by mice. The title is Underground Resonance Well, and the crooked pencil lines mark ore vein fault zone and natural resonance chamber. 20 years ago, miners drilled through the fault and turned the mine into a natural loudspeaker. Their distress signal during the mining accident was amplified by this well for 20 years. I pointed to the arrow on the diagram. The signal is now stable, probably because there are so many people listening. William suddenly interrupted, his mining lamp shining on the blueprint. The brainwave frequencies of those who said they heard in the comments overlapped with the resonance frequency of the mine. That's why the instrument detected the response pulses. It was the brains of living people resonating with the mine. I grabbed Daniel's wrist as his hand pressed on the power button. The current frequency does not interfere with any communications. I pressed the record button, and the mechanical sound echoed in the small room. If you turn it off, those sounds will turn into screams again. His Adam's apple moved, and his face became as pale as the old church at the entrance of the town. Do you know what this means? It means we need to figure out what the underground resonance well is connected to. Maya's camera flashed twice when the door curtain was blown up by the wind. She held up her phone. The screen was blindingly bright. The editor said we need to follow the whole process and film the follow-up. William's spectrometer suddenly beeped. He took a closer look, his eyes sparkling as he looked up. The pulse is moving again, in the direction of the resonance well. Daniel loosened his tie and stared at the red mark on the blueprint. We need someone to go down and take a look. I touched the buckle of the tool bag, and the sound of metal clashing mixed with the humming sound coming from the mine in the distance. This time, it was not a scream, but something clearer, as if waiting for a response. Maya hung the camera around her neck and raised an eyebrow at me. William had already started stuffing the spectrum analyzer and spare batteries into his toolkit. Daniel pulled at his wrinkled suit and pulled out a miniature recorder from his pocket. 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, he said. Bring enough equipment. I lowered my head to check the screws on the wrench and heard a very soft voice from beneath my skull. We are waiting. William tapped me on the shoulder as I stuffed the wrenches into my tool bag. His gloves were stained with the wet soil of the mine, and the smell was like rust mixed with moss. The ventilation holes in the mine haven't been repaired in 20 years. He shook the emergency oxygen tank on his waist. If you can't hold your breath, pull my straps. Daniel clipped the micro recorder to the inside of his collar, and the metal buckle clicked. Lend me Mira's geological hammer. He pointed to his trouser legs. Anti-slip. Mira said nothing, and stuffed a piece of magnetite into his hand. The dark grey stone glowed coldly under the mining lamp. There is a layer of magnetite on the rock wall. She pushed her goggles. Together with quartz crystals, it can serve as a natural conductor. The ladder leading down the well was badly rusted. When I stepped on it for the first time, I heard a slight sound of metal breaking. William held up the soles of my boots from below. I came here to pick up minecart parts 3 years ago. This ladder can hold up. His mining lamp shone upwards, and water seeping from the rock wall formed lines in the beam of light, dripping onto my helmet, making a ticking sound. The further down you go, the more frequent the spectrum analyzer's beeps become. William placed the instrument against the rock wall, and the green bar on the display screen changed into garbled text. The signal strength has doubled. He wiped the sweat from his forehead. It's the same sound as the old radio at the scrapyard in town yesterday. My temple began to throb. It was a dull pain, like someone was hitting the inside of the skull with a rubber hammer. Mira suddenly stopped and hit the rock wall with a geological hammer, making a crisp sound. Look at this. Her mining lamp swept across a group of crystals. Transparent quartz pillars emerged from the cracks in the rock and were arranged neatly. Naturally formed crystals would not be so regular. She took out the laser rangefinder, but her fingers were shaking so much that she couldn't press the button accurately. The distance between each one is 3.1 centimeters, the same as the third decimal place of the gravitational constant of the Earth and the Moon. Daniel's Adam's apple moved. He took out the recorder, pressed his thumb on the switch, and hid it in his palm. You said the mine disaster was an accident. He stared at the crystal wall. But how could the miners 20 years ago understand this kind of mathematics? The headache suddenly worsens. I held onto the rock wall, and what my fingertips touched was not rough rock, but something soft and warm. When he looked up, the hallucination came back again. The watermarks on the rock wall were distorted into human faces, 17 of them, exactly the same as the number on the list of mining disasters in the town annals. Their mouths were moving, not the screaming as before, but a rhythmic dialogue. No. R1. Received. No. 02. Received. No. 03. I rubbed my eyes and the watermarks turned into ordinary rock walls again. But the sound is still there. William's spectrum analyzer suddenly beeped, and the green bar shot up to the top. They are communicating, I blurted out. Not just calling for help, but calling the roll. Mira's geological hammer fell to the ground with a clang. She squatted down to pick it up, and the mining lamp shone on the bottom of the crystal wall. There were crooked numbers engraved there, from 1 to 17, exactly the same as the order of the dialogue in the hallucination. This is the receiving array. Her voice trembled. The crystal is responsible for collecting electromagnetic waves, and the numbers mark the receiving frequency. They are waiting for something. Daniel's recorder flashed red under his collar. What if this isn't a sequel of a mining accident? He loosened his tie. But someone or something took advantage of the mining accident to make a hole. The deepest cave was twice as large as shown on the drawing. There is a platform in the center that looks like it was chiseled out, with chisel marks still on the edges. There was a black rock in the middle of the platform. Its surface was as smooth as if it had been polished, and it was vibrating slightly with the beeping of the spectrometer. I squatted down and placed my palms on the black rock. The coolness penetrated through the skin and into the bones, and the headache suddenly disappeared. "You are finally here." The voice came out from the black rock, like someone talking in my ear. It was a male voice, with an electrical noise, but every word was eerily clear. My throat tightened. The buckle of the tool bag made a light click against my knee. I counted the sounds to calm myself. "Who is talking?" The vibration of black rock suddenly intensified. The skin on my palms was numb from the shock, and the faces of the miners in my hallucination came to me again. This time their mouths stopped moving. Instead they stared at me, 17 pairs of eyes as bright as mining lamps. "We have been waiting for a long time," the voice continued, "for someone who can hear." Daniel's recorder suddenly made a crackling sound. He fumbled to press the switch, and the miner's lamp was so bright that I couldn't open my eyes. Mira's laser rangefinder began to alarm, indicating that the angle of the crystal wall was being fine-tuned. The green bar on William's spectrometer suddenly returned to 0, and it became eerily quiet. I stared at the black rock in the palm of my hand. Fine cracks appeared on its surface, like some ancient writing. The buzzing started under my skull again. This time it wasn't painful, but some kind of itch that crawled from the back of my head up my spine, like a thin rope pulling me closer, closer. "We are not..." The sound stopped abruptly. Black water seeped out of the cracks in the black rock, dripping onto the platform, making a sizzling corrosion sound. William's mining lamp suddenly went out and the cave fell into darkness. I could hear my own rapid breathing, mixed with a distant hum like the ebb and flow of the tide. "Jane," Daniel's voice trembled in the darkness. "Are you okay?" I took out the spare mining lamp and turned it on. The cracks in the black rock closed up, and the surface returned to a smooth dark gray. Mira's geological hammer was still lying under the crystal wall, and the numbers displayed by the laser rangefinder were jumping wildly. William's spectrometer started beeping again, and the green bar stopped neatly in the middle, as if nothing had happened. "It's okay." I stood up, and the metal parts of the toolkit hit my legs with a clanking sound. "But I know." The half sentence that was cut off just now is still stuck in the black rock. "We are not." There is a very slight vibration deep in the rock wall, like someone typing in Morse code. I touched my burning temples and heard a clearer sentence mixed in with my own heartbeat. "We are listeners." I didn't duck when the black rock shook again. With my palm against the coolness, the miner's face in the illusion was like ashes blown away by the wind, revealing an even more blurred shadow behind it. Not a human figure, but some kind of flowing light, like the aurora surging in places where the mining lamp could not reach. "We are not the dead." This time the voice was clearer, mixed with some low-frequency vibrations similar to whale song, directly hitting my eardrums. "We are listeners." For the first time your voices penetrated the barriers, and we responded. My knees went weak, and I almost fell on the platform. The metal buckle of the tool bag hurt my thigh, which made me more awake. When I looked up, Mira was holding the laser rangefinder and gesturing at me. There was a thin layer of sweat on her glasses and her lips moved quickly. The change in the angle of the crystal wall matches the Cambrian stratum fold data. "What?" My voice was hoarse. "These crystals were formed at least 40,000 years ago." She stuffed the rangefinder into my arms and poked the lines on the rock wall with her fingers. "Look at these layers, they are completely different from the old mines outside the town. The mining accident 20 years ago was just a coincidence. Humans dug through something they shouldn't have touched." She suddenly fell silent and glanced at Daniel, who was squatting in front of the spectrometer. The guy's recorder was not turned off. I saw a red indicator light flashing on his collar, like a small bead of blood. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Mira nodded, her Adam's apple moving. "Not just me." The alarm of the rangefinder just now overlapped with the abnormal infrasound frequency I detected on the Greenland ice sheet when I was in college. She took out a piece of broken crystal from her pocket, which glowed blue under the mining lamp. "We thought we were receiving a signal," but we were actually being scanned. A sudden gust of wind blew into the cave, carrying the smell of damp rock powder. William's spectrum analyzer beeped, and the green bar suddenly jumped to the top. What seeped out from the fine cracks on the surface of the black rock was no longer black water, but some kind of fluorescent blue, as if crushed stars were mixed in. Scan, I repeated. It's like using sound waves to detect the seabed. Mira pressed the broken crystals against the rock wall. These minerals are natural resonance chambers. The explosion wave caused by the mine disaster 20 years ago was equivalent to ringing the first bell. After that, your radio, cell phone signals, all became hammers to ring the bells. She suddenly grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. The hallucinations of those miners are not evil spirits, but the after-images of our consciousnesses when they collided. I pulled my hand back and felt for the hex wrench on the side of the toolkit. The coolness of the metal crept up through the fingers, suppressing the tingling itch at the back of the neck. Daniel suddenly stood up. The recorder in his palm turned white. I want to upload this. No, I blurted out. He didn't look at me, but lowered his head and searched through his backpack for a portable hard drive. The FCC's encrypted server can store data for 500 years. Even if the cave collapses tomorrow, at least someone will know. He paused and pulled out a crumpled note from his inner pocket. For you. On the note was his scribbled handwriting. I knew you would stay, but they have the right to choose to listen or not. I held the note in my hand and watched him pick up his bag and walk out of the cave. The light from the mining lamp cast a long shadow on the rock wall, like a broken thread. Daniel, I yelled. He didn't look back, but raised his hand and waved. The footsteps gradually faded away, mixed with the crisp sound of water dripping from the cave ceiling, and finally only the sound of Mira's geological hammer hitting the rock remained. He's right, Mira said suddenly. Humans should know what they are talking to. I didn't respond. Looking down at the black rock, the blue fluorescence was climbing up along the lines of my palms like a group of lost fireflies. When we got back to the radio station, Irene was squatting behind the console, cleaning the headphones. She looked up and saw me, and the flannel in her hand fell to the ground with a pop. Your eyes are red. I touched my eye sockets and my fingertips were wet. I don't remember when I started crying. Change the frequency. I threw the toolkit on the table, and the metal parts made a dull sound. Change from passive reception to active transmission. Erin didn't move. The old sheriff smashed 3 radios with a shotgun yesterday. They say the sound tickles their brains. That's because we're screaming. I pulled the spectrum chart and circled the most chaotic bands with a red pen. Those whispers are them learning our language. Just like when you teach a parrot to talk, it can only learn half of it at first. I looked up at her. Now, we are going to teach it to speak in complete sentences. Irene stared at the red circle I drew, and her Adam's apple moved. And then, invitation. I plugged the headphone plug into the new tunes jack, inviting anyone who is willing to listen to join the conversation. Instead of using everyone's brain as a resonance box as before, she was silent for a while, then bent down to pick up the flannel. What do you need me to do? Hold this frequency. I handed her the wrench. If someone comes to smash the equipment, hit them on the knees with this. She forced a laugh and stuffed the wrench into her apron pocket. I hit my ex-husband on the calf with a frying pan when he was drunk and making trouble. At 10 o'clock in the evening, there was only me and the wall clock left in the radio station. The green light on the console blinked in the darkness, like a fluorescent light on a black rock. I put on my shiny headphones and pressed the transmitter button. Amid the noise of the electric current, the first sound that came in was the sound of the tide. Not ocean waves, but something heavier, like the vibration of the Earth's core breathing. Then come the fragments of words that don't form sentences but carry warmth similar to the resonance of a mother's chest when she hums a lullaby, or the warmth of a stranger handing over hot coffee in the snow. I heard you, I whispered into the microphone. The sound of the tide suddenly rose, wrapped in fragmented responses. Not words, but emotions. Curiosity, relief, even joy. For a moment, I remembered that when I was 7 years old, my mother used a white noise machine to coax me to sleep, and suddenly a piece of piano music came out from the noise of the current. She recorded it secretly and said it was the sound waves greeting us. The vibration in the earphones went along the ear bones into my brain. This time it didn't hurt. It felt like someone was gently rubbing my tight temples. I took off my headphones and felt the tears on my cheeks. It turns out that I wasn't the one crying, but those voices were expressing themselves through my eyes. At 3 in the morning, I dozed off on the console. I heard the door open in a daze, and the corner of Irene's apron brushed the back of my hand and put down the cup of hot cocoa. She didn't say anything, just patted my shoulder. Early in the morning of the third day, I was awakened by the sound of the radio. It was not the shrill sound from before, but a soft sound like the wind blowing through a pine forest, mixed with a faint humming. I rushed downstairs and saw Irene standing in front of the console, headphones hanging around her neck, her eyes abnormally bright. She pointed out the window. I looked over there. Under the old elm tree, at the entrance of the town, several men who were holding hunting rifles yesterday were squatting on the ground with radios in their hands. Their expressions were not of madness but of concentration, like children hearing a story for the first time, afraid of missing any word. Ruth's grocery opened its doors. She stood behind the counter, filling glass jars with candy in such slow movements that it looked like she was dancing. When she saw me, she raised her head and curled up the corners of her mouth. That was the smile before it was contaminated, with a hint of cunning. Want a mint? Newly arrived. I fished out my wallet, and my fingertips touched the note in my pocket. Daniel's handwriting was a little blurred by sweat, but the words "they have the right to choose" were still clear. The green light on the console suddenly flashed 3 times. I walked over and saw that the frequency display was jumping slightly. It was not a malfunction, but some kind of regular rhythm, like typing in Morse code. "Someone wants to talk to you alone," Irene said softly. I put on my headphones. This time the voice was very light, like a feather brushing across the eardrum. "We have been waiting for a long time." I laughed. 3 days later, late at night, the signal from the radio station suddenly fluctuated abnormally. When Irene called me, I was squatting in front of the black rock of the old mine, with the familiar coolness against my palms. The frequency jumped to a band that has never appeared before. Her voice was trembling, but it's not scary at all. I looked up. Moonlight leaked through the cracks in the cave ceiling and shone on the black rock. The tiny blue fluorescent lights were forming new lines. Not cracks, but some kind of letter-like symbols, crooked and twisted, like a child learning to write for the first time. There were footsteps in the distance. I didn't have to look back to know who it was. Little Ellie from the east end of town, the 12-year-old boy who always followed me around asking questions about the radio. He held up his homemade crystal radio, his eyes shining like stars. "My radio is on. There are." His voice was interrupted by the sound of the wind. I touched my burning temple and heard a sentence from under my skull, which was clearer than before. We learned it. On the morning of the third day, I was repairing the power regulator of the radio station when Irene pushed the door open, the manila folder rustling in her hands. In Calgary, she slapped the paper on the operating table, her fingertips pressing on a line of records circled in red. At 11:17 last night, an amateur radio enthusiast named Northern Hummingbird posted on the forum that he received a fuzzy audio clip. I took off my gloves. The waveform image on the printed paper was a crumpled tinfoil with text attached next to it. "Did you hear it?" The tail tone was torn into pieces by the electric current, as if someone had soaked half of the sentence in water. "Did you adjust the test frequency?" Irene stared at me. I shook my head. The fingertips slid across the edge of the waveform, There were slight sawtooth patterns at the end of the wave. It was not an artificially modulated square wave, but more like some kind of bioelectric vibration. It could be a cross-channel connection. I pushed the paper back, but let the technical department track the IP. Irene didn't move, her eyelashes fluttering. He said. The voice sounded like asking, "Is anyone awake?" I tightened my grip on the screwdriver. The crooked fluorescent symbols in the mine 3 days ago suddenly appeared in front of my eyes when little Ellie held up the crystal radio and shouted, "There's something in there." What came in the wind was clearly the temptation, like a baby learning to speak. Go to the resonance well to find Mira in the afternoon. Her tent was set up 10 meters away from the edge of the well. An oscilloscope was spread out on the folding table. The waveform on the screen was like a school of swimming silverfish, vibrating at a frequency completely different from that of the radio station. Reverse fluctuation. She didn't even look up, writing on her notebook with her fountain pen. Since the day before yesterday, every time a low frequency is released underground, the surface will rebound to a weaker frequency of the same frequency. She suddenly closed the notebook, and when she looked up, her glasses reflected the light. I sent it to the old professor in the geology department, using an encrypted email. Why? Because on his desk is a record of earthquake waves in the Yukon from 30 years ago. She pushed the oscilloscope towards me, and several overlapping peaks and valleys emerged in the green ripples. And this seems to be carved from the same mold. I squatted down. The intervals between those wave peaks are exactly the same as the arrangement pattern of the fluorescent symbols on the black rocks in the mine. Don't tell anyone I did this. She suddenly grabbed my wrist, her fingertips as cool as well water. Not even Daniel. Daniel left in the evening. When I was squatting at the entrance of the town, repairing the signal receiver of the old mailbox, I saw his old pickup truck turning out from the main street, with a canvas bag tied to the back of the truck. It used to contain his investigative equipment, and now it should contain a recorder. I straightened up as he rolled down the window. "To Calgary," he said, his Adam's apple moving. The truck driver agreed to take me part of the way. I didn't ask him what he brought. When he was recording the We Learned audio in the mine last Wednesday, I caught a glimpse of the red indicator light on the recorder lighting up 3 times. He turned it off and on, as if he was picking out the clearest clips. "It's not pollution," he said suddenly, his voice carried away by the wind. "It's they are learning to speak." In the dust raised by the pickup truck, I took out the note from my pocket. The words he wrote, "They have the right to choose," were frayed at the edges, as if they had been repeatedly rubbed. At 10 o'clock in the evening, William called the radio station. I was adjusting the new frequency modulator when his voice came with a murmur. "Jane, come quickly." The red light on the console was flashing. William's earphone wire was wrapped around his wrist. His knuckles were white. Just now, there was a woman. He licked his lips. She said, "Hello, is anyone listening?" I called up the monitoring records. The audio file is 17 seconds long. The first 3 seconds are the sound of electric current, and the 4th second suddenly becomes clear. "Hello? Is anyone listening?" The ending tone has a bit of the soft rolled tongue of Eastern Canada, like the accent of Toronto. I replied, "We are here." William touched the cross on his chest, and she took a breath. I pressed play. The 17-second audio looped in the empty radio station. The sound of the inhalation was like a small stone, whoosh hitting the center of the lake. At 1 o'clock in the morning, I sat back down at the console. In front of her were Irene's Calgary records, Mira's fluctuation data, and William's monitoring audio. They were like a puzzle, forming a vague outline on the tablecloth. Something was responding, hundreds of kilometers away. I brought up the white noise generator interface. That was the equipment my mother used to treat my trauma, and now it lies quietly at the bottom of the toolkit. "If you're listening," I said into the microphone, my finger hovering over the send button, "please don't be afraid." The signal light on the console suddenly began flashing, not a fault code, but a rhythm of 3 long and 2 short, like some ancient greeting. I stared at the string of flickering lights. William's monitoring records cast a blue shadow on the computer. The last sentence, "we are," was magnified repeatedly by me. In the folds of the waveform, I could vaguely see another series of lighter ripples, which were carefully exploring deeper. The buckle of the tool bag suddenly clicked. I looked down and saw that the switch of the white noise generator had been opened a crack at some point. The light green indicator light glowed faintly in the darkness, like an eye that had just woken up. At 2:17 in the morning, I turned the knob of the white noise generator to the third position. "This is the heart rate." I shook the oscilloscope at Irene. The green waveform was beating at a rhythm of 76 beats per minute, completely in sync with my pulse at the moment. The tool bag was open, and the screwdrivers and welding machines inside glowed coldly under the light of the console. The sound of metal colliding was like some kind of discordant soothing song. William poked his head out from the inner room, the earphone wire wrapped around his arm. "Are you sure you want to add the low-frequency hum of the mine? This is in their signal." I called up the audio I had recorded before, and there was indeed a low vibration mixed in with the sound of the electric current, like thunder in the distance. My mother taught me that humans' perception of low-frequency sound waves is hidden in the subconscious. We have to let the other party know that we are not randomly interfering. Mira's geological hammer slammed on the table. She spread out the mine structure map and poked at a few shadows with the tip of her pencil. "Look at these crystal layers." She was referring to the translucent quartz on the rock wall of the mine. "Last week I measured the reflectivity, their absorption-reflection ratio for specific frequencies." She paused, like a language converter. Irene looked up from the signal receiver. "You mean the mine isn't a passive receiver?" "Active translation." Mira drew 3 circles on the map. "If these 3 points are activated at the same time," her pencil tip connected the radio station and east mine entrance and old church basement with a line, "it may form a clearer communication path." The console suddenly made a beeping sound. When I rushed over, William had already turned on the monitoring audio. In the 17-second recording, after the Toronto-style soft-rolled hello, there was a new content. The sound of the current suddenly became thinner, like someone pressing a finger on the microphone, followed by a very light hello. "Catherine in Calgary." I pulled out the note that Erin had written down with her contact information. "A ham radio operator with an old shortwave radio in the basement. Irene said she uploaded an audio clip at 3 p.m. yesterday. She is deaf-mute." I stared at the waveform, and there was a slight tremor at the end of the voice, but she uses a brain-computer interface to listen to the sound. William's hands were shaking. "Can she hear me?" "She can convert sound waves into neural signals." I grabbed the phone and dialed the number on the note. After 7 rings, the other party picked up, a female voice with an electronic sound, probably a screen reader software. "I'm Catherine Lee. This is Jane Mason." I put the phone on speaker. "We received the audio you uploaded yesterday." There was silence for 2 seconds. Then there was the sound of paper rubbing against each other, and then an electronic voice. I recorded a new response. Irene had already tuned in to the shortwave band. I saw her fingers flying across the keyboard, finally stopping on the upload key. "Ready. Send it," I said. The red light on the console began to flash. This time it wasn't a fault code, but 3 long and 2 short beeps, exactly the same as the string of lights last night. William's cross dangled on his chest, and he leaned closer to the microphone. "We are listening." The sound of electricity suddenly increased in volume, as if someone had yanked open the faders on a mixing console. Then, with crystal clearness, a voice came out of the speaker. "I am," pause, as if searching for words, "a part of you." Irene's pen fell to the ground with a clack. William almost knocked over the chair when he rushed in. She heard it. She really quiet. I pressed the record button and put on my headphones. The sound of electricity in the headset suddenly became soft, as if wrapped in a layer of cotton. I spoke slowly into the microphone. "If you are willing to talk, we will listen." The signal light starts flashing. This time the rhythm was synchronized with my breathing. Inhale, 3 short breaths. Exhale, 2 long breaths. I stared at the oscilloscope. In the green curve of the heartbeat wave, another ripple slowly emerged. It was lighter in color, but it was trying to match my frequency. It was 4 a.m. when Catherine Lee woke up in her Calgary apartment. She touched the brain-computer interface on the bedside table, and last night's recording was still looping. In the waveform graph on the electronic screen, there is a new series of pulses beating, like some tentative touch. As she took off the device, a voice suddenly sounded in her ear, as light as a feather. "Listen." She was stunned for 2 seconds, then turned over and turned on the shortwave radio. At this moment in the Yinshi Town radio station, the indicator lights on my white noise generator suddenly lit up. The green light reflected on the oscilloscope, making the pale ripple clearer. It was growing, like a tree trying to take root deep down. At 4 in the morning, I stared at the light green ripple on the oscilloscope. It's still growing, like a vine crawling all over the screen. The phone vibrated on the console. It was a message from Catherine Lee. When I clicked on the video, her face glowed blue on the screen. "Jane, take a look at this." She pointed her finger at the computer screen. Last night's brain-computer interface log had an extra memory that didn't belong to me. The video cuts to her desktop, where the log file of the brain-computer interface flashes. After zooming in, it was a series of blurry images. A damp rock wall, a mining lamp swinging overhead, someone typing on a telegraph, the crackling sound of Morse code. In the records of the mining accident 20 years ago, the model of the underground transmitter was the same as this one. Her voice was tense. The distress signal they sent at that time is now in my mind. I squeezed the clasp of the tool bag. The sound of metal clanging calmed me down. "Save it and pass it to me." After hanging up the phone, the intercom on the console rang. "It's Mila Harris. She's over at the resonance well." "Jane, guess what I found?" She breathed heavily. "There's something engraved on the newly exposed crystal surface." I pulled up the photos she sent me. The crooked scratches on the dark purple crystal looked like they were made by fingernails. "This is..." I took out the old notebook in my backpack, which contained my mother's white noise therapy records. On the yellowed pages, the words resonance, frequency, and resonance point were circled again and again in red pen. "We've compared them." Mira's voice dropped. "The similarity is 87%. It's looking for someone who can resonate with it, Jane. Your treatment records and Catherine's brain-computer interface are all resonance points." I pressed the notebook to my chest. My mother's handwriting still smells of mint, and she always said that white noise is a spiritual tuning console. Now that I think about it, it wasn't treatment, it was training. Training me to become a kind of container. In the evening, the door of the radio station was kicked open. Carl Brainard stood in the doorway, clutching a silver pillbox. He used to be a psychiatrist. When he left Silver Creek 3 years ago, he said the mines here are eating people. Now his white coat was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot. "Stop all broadcasts." He slammed the pillbox on the console. "This is a neurosuppressant that will block your connection to the signal. You're inviting trouble, Jane. Those noises are not conversations. They're invasions." I felt the ripples on the oscilloscope. It's beating in sync with my heart now. Once, twice, like someone tapping my ribs. What if they were originally part of us? I looked up at him. The resentment of the mine disaster and the obsession with seeking help have been floating in the electromagnetic waves for 20 years. Catherine can hear it. Mira can see it. Irene. The lights in the radio station suddenly dimmed. Irene came out from the inner room, with the headphone cord wrapped around her neck. Her eyes were abnormally bright, like glass beads soaked in water. I heard them say thank you for not forgetting us. She touched her headphones. I didn't dare to listen to them before, for fear of reminding me of my dad. He was also in the mine disaster. Carl's face turned pale. "Erin, You are contaminated. No, Irene smiled. They reminded me of this. My dad's hands were shaking when he sent the last message. He said, "Little Irene, Dad has saved money to buy you a new school bag." She took out her wallet, which contained a faded photo of a little girl with pigtails holding a pink school bag. I had forgotten this photo. I opened the drawer of the console, and inside lay my mother's white noise generator. The green indicator light looks like a little sun in the dark night. They're not trying to invade. I typed the last part of the broadcast into the system. They're looking for someone who can hear them, someone who can remember them. Carl grabbed my wrist and said, "Do you know how many people this will make you like? Become someone who can remember." I pulled my hand away and pressed the send button. The signal light on the console began to flash. This time it was not a fault code, but countless rhythms, fast, slow, strong, weak, like countless hearts beating in synchronization. There was a low hum in the air, like wind blowing through countless empty rooms, or like countless voices saying "we are here" at the same time. At 2 a.m, I received a message from Catherine. In her video, the frequency of the shortwave radio automatically jumped to the band of Silver Creek Town, and the words "we are here" were repeated in the loudspeaker. Her finger hovered over the off button for a long time, and finally pressed it lightly, not to turn it off but to turn up the volume. I turned off the light. The ripples on the oscilloscope were still growing. This time it was not light green, but the color of starlight. At 3 a.m, my phone screen lit up. Catherine's message popped up with a 17-second audio file attached. The file name is Resonance 001. I hit the play button. The words "we are here" were heard in the noise of the electric current. They were repeated 7 times, and the ending tone of each time was 0.5 hertz higher than the previous one. It's like someone is tuning a string, and it gets tighter and tighter. She then sent a text message. Brain-computer interface records show that my temporal cortex activity is 37% higher than usual when playing. I stared at the EEG graph on my phone, and a few clusters of glaring red emerged in the blue ripples. It has been uploaded to the Neuroscience Forum, and the postscript says "Resonance Experiment." At 4:17 a.m, the forum reminder sounded. Anonymous user Earthvane Observer replied, "I can also hear after the earthquake. Not with my ears, but with the back of my neck, as if someone brushed a feather across my spine." 3 exclamation marks popped up in Catherine's dialog box, followed by a screenshot. The other party sent a scan of the underground rock formations, with a blurry shadow at the fault. They were typing Morse code in the rock formations, short, long, short, the same rhythm as your audio. I dangled my phone to the console. Irene's notebook was digging into my knees in the drawer. She changed 3 blue-black ink pens today. The page was full of wavy lines, and a date was marked under each wavy line. October 5, 2023. Frequency 102.3 MHz. Little Irene. New school bag. Matching the dream record of Mary Brown, a survivor of the 1999 mine accident. I heard my father say he would buy me new things. October 5, 2023. 1612. Frequency 98.7 MHz. Only 2 hours of oxygen left. Matching the testimony of the miners' families in 1999. The rescue log stated that there were 120 minutes of oxygen left underground. I was on page 3 when she pushed the door open. In her hand, she held a yellowed copy of Yingshi Town Mine Disaster Investigation Report, with coffee stains on the cover. "Look," she slapped the report in front of me and pointed to one of the pages. The survivors said that they heard someone counting seconds before they passed out. She opened her notebook, and the latest page had a wavy line next to it that read, October 5, 2023. Frequency 100.1 MHz. Mine 119, 2018, 2018, 2017. I counted them and found there were exactly 119 wavy lines. I was pouring hot water for Irene when Mira called in. She was breathing heavily, and there was a crackling sound of electricity in the background. "I'm in the resonance well," she gasped. The new sensor detected theta waves. I heard the sound of keyboard tapping. 0.59 Hz. Exactly the same as the brainwaves of humans in deep meditation. Pause for 2 seconds. Jane, they don't speak with their vocal cords, but with... Her voice suddenly became distant, as if someone had covered the microphone. Wait for me to adjust the equipment. When it sounded again, her voice trembled. Now the sensor shows that the pulse rhythm is synchronized with my brain waves. At 5 in the morning, Daniel's encrypted email popped up. The theme is high-level response. The text only had 2 sentences. Mysterious consultant requested a direct connection. The coordinates are Yinshi Town. They said it was not a shutdown, but a connection. The attachment was a recording. I clicked it and heard Daniel's voice. What do you want to do? After 3 seconds of silence, a male voice came out from the current noise, as if a voice changer was pressed. We need to confirm whether this is one-way pollution. His tail tone was cut off. Anyway, prepare to receive the team. When I took off my headphones, the back of my neck was covered in sweat. The signal light on the console was flashing. Once, twice, in sync with my heartbeat. My mother's white noise generator was flashing green light in the drawer, like a little sun. If you're willing to talk, I whispered into the microphone. We'll listen. The traffic light suddenly sped up its rhythm. 3 short and 1 long. 3 short and 1 long. Just like the V in Morse code. It represents the symbol of victory. At 6 in the morning, William came to take over the shift. He rubbed his eyes and placed the thermos on the console. The headphone cord wrapped around his wrist. Sister Jian. He pulled at his loose collar. The bureau said they will send an investigation team today. When he put on his headphones, I caught a glimpse of a light red mark behind his ear, as if it had been burned by something. As I was packing up my tool bag, I heard him mutter in a low voice, "Why is there a wind noise in these headphones?" The moment I closed the door, I heard him gasp. Wait. His voice was tense. Someone's talking. When I closed the door of the radio station, William's voice came out from the crack of the door, with a trembling tension. Wait, is someone talking? I didn't look back. At 6 in the morning, Yinshi Town was like a piece of frozen black bread, and the exhaled breath condensed into white mist in front of my eyes. The toolkit hit my thigh, and the metal parts clanged. This was an old habit I brought back from the Yukon, using the noise to drown out the faint buzzing in my head. But today something is not right. When they arrived at the grocery store at the entrance of town, Ruth's husband was nailing boards on the window. He used to love talking to me about ice hockey, but now he holds his hammer crookedly, and his knuckles are as blue as frozen carrots. I took out my phone to take a picture and send it to Mira, but the screen went dark just as it lit up. Another signal problem. Simple. It's Irene. She was wrapped in a gray sweater and holding a cup of instant coffee with brown stains on the wall. 3 days ago, she was still huddled in the corner of the radio station, staring at the radio as if she were looking at a poisonous snake. But now she is actively moving towards me, with her hair ends covered with uncombed strands of hair. I'm on night shift. She stuffed the coffee into my hand. Her fingertips were surprisingly cold. William said you left a new broadcast script. I nodded, holding the coffee cup. The page I wrote at 4 in the morning is still on the outermost layer of the toolkit, and the words are wrinkled by my scribbles. If you can hear me talking, you are welcome to join me. This is not a curse, nor is it an illusion. This is a long-awaited conversation. Irene suddenly smiled. Her lips were pulled stiffly. I was wearing headphones. She pointed behind her ear, where there was the same light red mark as William's. I heard them say thank you for not forgetting us. She sniffed with water droplets hanging on her eyelashes. I didn't forget really. It's just, I didn't respond. The wind lifted the corner of her clothes, revealing the silver cross pinned inside. It was a gift from her fiancé during the mine accident, and was buried underground 20 years ago. When I returned to the temporary rented cabin, the satellite phone on the table was vibrating. It was an encrypted file sent by Mira, titled Calgary Amateur Station Log. I clicked it and found a recording. Amidst the noise of electricity, the ticking sound of Morse code sounded like a heartbeat. followed by a female voice with a trembling excitement. "Who am I?" 3 hours later, the reply came. It was white noise mixed with a regular heartbeat, with a vague sentence underneath, like someone putting their face to the microphone and breathing, "You are an extension of us." I felt a chill run down my spine. Mira's note popped up. Catherine Lee, 37, former Air Force signalman, has 8 homemade receivers in her basement. She emailed me at 3 a.m. yesterday and said those signals are waiting for a response. The satellite phone vibrated again. This time it was an email from the University of Vancouver, and the sender was Professor Marcus Baker. Attached is a scan of his experimental log with the last page circled in red pen. 0.5 TOS, 4 Hz low-frequency pulses, completely overlapping with human theta waves. This is not interference, it's language. I turned to the audio file he attached. The moment I clicked on it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was that weird radio sound that I had heard on the radio station, mixed with whispers and screams. But this time there was an additional layer of vague rhythm, like someone was keeping the beat with their breathing. Simple. When William called, I was staring at the waveform jumping on the computer screen. His voice was a little tense and fast. Just now a woman asked in the headset, "Is anyone listening?" I replied, "We are." He paused for 2 seconds. Then she took a breath, very clearly, as if she was standing behind me. I fished out my mother's white noise generator. She modified this thing from an old radio. Now the green light is flashing faster than usual, as if it is competing with something. "Switch to 100.1, I said into the phone. "I want to make a broadcast." The radio station's console glowed coldly in the twilight. I put the written broadcast script into the manuscript reader, and when my finger pressed the send button, my temple throbbed. This was a sign that hallucinations were coming. But this time it was different. I didn't hide. Instead, I moved closer to the microphone. "If you can hear me, you are welcome to join. This is not a curse, nor is it an illusion. This is a long-awaited conversation." The moment the send button was pressed, the signal lights in the entire room lit up at the same time. The buzzing sound came from all directions, low and harmonious, like countless voices overlapping and humming the same tune. I saw the frequency meter on the console jumping wildly, and finally stopped at 100.1 MHz minus, exactly the same as the distress frequency during the mine disaster 20 years ago. My phone vibrates in my pocket. It was a photo sent by Irene. She was standing at the door of the radio station. The sky behind her was an unnatural purple. The headphone wires hung at her side, and a smile played at the corners of her mouth. The caption only had 3 words. They laughed. At 2 in the morning, I received a text message from Catherine Lee. She sent a photo of a basement wall covered with receivers, all with their screens lit up, the waveform images coming alive and twisting into golden swirls. The text only said, "I turned up the gain." I stared at the dark figure behind her in the photo. The thing was translucent and had the outline of a person, raising its hand to touch the nearest receiver. There was a sound of wind outside the window. This time it was not an illusion. I turned off the lights. The green light of the white noise generator flickered in the darkness, like a small restless heart. Somewhere in a Calgary basement, Catherine Lee was piping a mysterious signal into a loudspeaker. As she turned up the volume, a crack suddenly appeared on the glass. She didn't pay attention, just stared at the waveform jumping on the screen and whispered, "One more time." Something in the sound of the wind responded softly to her words. At 3 in the morning, the phone vibrated on the edge of the console. I swiped the screen, and a text message from Catherine Lee popped up. Recorded response, uploaded 100.1. Attached were 3 voice files with the file names labeled response 001, 003. She is deaf and mute, and the brain-computer interface can convert sound waves into neural signals. Now those signals are drilling into my phone through the 4G network. I clicked on the first file. A mechanical synthesized voice suddenly emerged from the sound of electric current. "We are here. Who are you?" It was Catherine's sign language converted into text, with the unique mechanical feel of electronic sound. The second file had the sound of glass breaking in the background, and her voice was clearer. "Don't be afraid, we can hear you." The third file was the strangest, with low-frequency vibrations similar to breathing mixed in with the sound of electricity, and her voice was so light that it sounded like a sigh. "Have you been waiting for a long time?" The phone vibrated again. It was Marcus Baker. His voice exploded from the receiver. "Jane, did you see the waveform that Catherine sent?" I called up the spectrum she uploaded, and the green ripples looked like wheat waves blown by the wind. "Grammar structure." He spoke as fast as a machine gun. "The first layer is a repeated distress signal. The second layer begins to appear conditional sentences. The third layer," he paused, "the tenses are changing. Past tense, present continuous tense, and even future tense are embedded. It is learning how we speak." "Learn to speak." I squeezed the white noise generator tightly, and the green light was hot. Yes, the sound of his keyboard tapping was clearly audible. It's like a baby's babbling, but it learned the distress pattern from 20 years ago, and is now absorbing our response. I just ran it through the neurolinguistic model, and its entropy value is decreasing. He suddenly lowered his voice. "Jane, it's getting smarter." The door of the radio station was pushed open. Irene Walker came in with a stack of discs, her hair wet with night dew, and a cup of hot coffee in her hand. She knew I would get a migraine if I stayed up all night. "Adjust the white noise module." She put the disc into the player. "Add heartbeat waves and low-frequency sounds. They'll know this is not random interference." I turned the frequency knob and the 100.1 MHz pointer trembled slightly, as if testing something. "They need to know we listen," I said. Irene nodded and ran her fingertips across the mixing console. 20 years ago, the only signal in the mine was help. Now we have a new word for it: dialogue. There was the sound of a car engine outside the window. I looked up and saw a silver sedan parked in front of the radio station. The license plate was from Ottawa. The FCC was here. Ryan Fletcher got out of the car, and a corner of his black windbreaker was lifted by the mountain breeze, revealing the equipment bag around his waist. He didn't go in immediately, but stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at the sky. I saw him say something into the lapel microphone. His Adam's apple moved, and then he turned and looked in the direction of the control console. "He's from the Federation." Irene followed my gaze and said, "I received a notification this morning that his mission is to establish a stable connection." She tugged at my sleeve and said, "Let's get the confirmation sequence first." I pressed the mix button, and white noise, heartbeat waves, and low-frequency sounds mixed together like wrapping the signal in a warm shell. The signal lights on the console suddenly lit up collectively. Instead of flashing randomly as before, they flickered in a regular pattern. 2 short and 1 long, 2 short and 1 long. "It's Morse code." Erin looked closer. "SOS." My temples were throbbing, a sign of hallucination, but I didn't dodge it this time. I took out my mother's white noise generator, and the rhythm of the green light and the signal light gradually synchronized. "It's time to record." I put on the headphones and put the microphone to my lips. Irene helped me adjust the gain. "Speak slowly, they need time to understand." I exhaled into the microphone, and my breath condensed into white mist in front of the mic. "If you are willing to talk," paused for 2 seconds, "we will listen." The moment I pressed the record button, the signal lights on the entire console suddenly began to flash, and the rhythm completely coincided with my heartbeat. Boom, 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 boom. There were footsteps outside the window. I looked up, and Ryan Fletcher was standing in the doorway, his hand hanging on the doorknob. He peered through the glass, his eyes darting from the console to me to Eileen, and finally to the frequency meter 100.1 MHz steady. His finger paused on the door handle for 2 seconds, then dropped it again. The mountain breeze lifted the corner of his clothes, revealing a portable spectrum analyzer flashing red light in his equipment bag. The white noise generator vibrated in my palm, as if imitating a heartbeat. The signal light on the console was still flashing, two short and one long, two short and one long. And in a Calgary basement, Catherine Lee's brain-computer interface suddenly began beeping. She stared at the golden vortex on the screen and reached out to touch the translucent shadow. When Shadow's fingertips touched hers, vague syllables came from the loudspeaker, like thank you or listen. Ryan Fletcher turned and walked toward the sedan, his hands in his windbreaker pockets. His steps were very slow, and each step seemed to be measuring something. In the window of the radio station, Jane Mason's shadow was still busy at the control console, the light of the signal light reflected on her face, flickering. He fished out his cell phone and pressed the speed dial button. "The target is in a stable condition," he said into the microphone. "It is recommended to keep observing." The wind blew the mountain fog over, blurring his outline. Only the signal light at the radio station was still flashing stubbornly. Two short and one long, two short and one long, like some kind of code waiting for a response. I stared at the signal light on the console, two short and one long, like a stuck heartbeat. Ryan Fletcher's shadow had long been swallowed up by the mountain fog, and only the rustling sound of the wind blowing through the pine needles hit the glass. Irene poked my arm and said, "It's time to check the feeder." She pointed her chin toward the spectrum analyzer. The 100.1 MHz waveform was abnormally stable, like a piece of frozen ice. I pulled off my headphones and the metal hook scraped my earlobe, causing me to wince in pain. The pain was more real than the buzzing sound in my head. While squatting under the iron frame to measure the resistance of the feeder line, my peripheral vision caught a glimpse of a gray shadow passing by the corner of the street. It was Ryan. His gray windbreaker bulged like a flag, and his black leather notebook clenched tightly. He walked toward Miller's grocery store, the bell on the door ringing in the wind. Ruth wasn't slumped behind the counter today. She pressed her nose against the glass, leaving a red mark, and her eyes were fixed on the radio on the top shelf. Ryan pushed open the door, and the bell jingled. Her fingers suddenly twitched and pointed at the radio, and a gurgling sound came out of her throat, as if a fishbone was stuck in her throat. Ryan took a half step back and lowered his head to write on the notebook. I straightened up, the back of my neck stiff as a brick. My mother's white noise generator vibrated in her pocket, as regular as a second hand. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the fog dissipated a little. I was wiping the terminal with an alcohol wipe when there was a knock on the door. 3 short and 1 long, in rhythm with the traffic light. When I opened the door, a cold breeze blew in, carrying the scent of pine needles. Ryan stood on the steps, a black leather notebook tucked under his arm, his fingertips stained with blue ink. "You're not sending a signal." He stared at the control panel behind me. "You're opening the door." I didn't give in and asked, "Who let you in?" He pulled out his ID and the FCC badge flashed, emergency authorization. He then pulled out a piece of paper with the corners rolled up, observation record. I glanced at it and saw the handwriting was scribbled. "The target's behavior is stable, his emotions are not fluctuating, and he has a high degree of organizational ability." There was a spectrum graph drawn on the edge of the page, and the 100.1 MHz waveform was circled 3 times in red pen, with key nodes marked crookedly outside the circle. Following me. Observation. He pressed the paper into my hand. "I want to establish a formal connection." The light on the console suddenly lit up, blinding people. I staggered 2 steps and held on to the corner of the table. This time it was not an illusion. The needles of all the instruments were spinning wildly. Irene rushed out from the inner room, her hair sticking up like a bird's nest. The frequency jumped. 100.1 became 100.3. Ryan passed me and put his fingertips on the spectrum analyzer. "The tuner is loose." He took out a small wrench from his windbreaker pocket, and his movements were more familiar than mine. The Alaska satellite station has been under repair for 3 years. The metallic clanking reminded me of a toolkit. I squeezed the white noise generator in my pocket, and my heartbeat slowly slowed down. "Do you know what to connect?" I asked. He tightened the last screw, and when he looked up, the light reflected from his glasses. "I don't know." He paused for 2 seconds, "but I'm ready." The light on the console started flashing 2 short and 1 long again. Erin suddenly pulled my sleeve, and the phone screen lit up. Catherine in Calgary sent a message. She opened an audio clip, and the sound of electricity mixed with the vague, "You are part of us." Ryan's pen scratched on the notebook. 7 regions around the world are on the same frequency. There's Evan in Vancouver, and his cell phone recorded a fluctuation of 100.1. He turned the page. There's also a geologist named Mira, who found notches in the resonant well and said the signal is evolving. I stared at the map in his notebook. The red dots splashed from Silver Creek to Calgary and Vancouver, like blood dripping into clear water. "So you're staying?" He closed the book. "What do you need me to do?" The signal light flashed more rapidly. I pointed to the operator's seat and said, "Learn the tuner." He sat over and put his fingers on the knob, as if he were touching a living thing. The mountain breeze lifted the corner of his clothes, revealing the spectrum analyzer in his equipment bag. The red light went out and was now a steady green. The white noise generator vibrated in my palm, and this time the rhythm coincided with Ryan's breathing. The light on the console was still flashing. 2 short and 1 long. 2 short and 1 long. It seems like he is counting something, and also like he is waiting for something. Ryan's notebook is always spread out on the workbench. When I tuned the tuner, his pen moved with it. When I changed the fuse, he drew the wiring diagram. In 3 days, I haven't seen him touch any equipment, except for the wrench he used to repair the tuner that day. "Why are you writing these down?" I tugged at his notebook. There were coffee stains on the edge of the paper, and they were filled with the shapes of my hands when I was operating it, the angle at which my thumb pressed the knob, and the force with which my index finger dialed the frequency key. "Learn." He pushed up his glasses. "The Federal Bureau teaches theory. You amateur repairman." He paused. "You are closer to the signal itself." At 3 o'clock in the morning, the red light on the console was still flashing. Ryan was wearing headphones and his back was as tense as a string. I took out the white noise generator, placed the metal casing against my palm, and the vibration frequency was synchronized with his breathing. Click. He suddenly took off his headphones. The eyes behind the lenses were wide open. It said, "You are here." I didn't respond. The human voice in the signal was no secret. Ruth muttered before she fell into a daze, and the old sheriff shouted when he raised his gun. It was just blurry before, as if there was water between them, but this time, it's too clear. "They are welcoming you." I tugged at the pocket of my overalls, where the bottle of mineral water that Ruth had stuffed in it was, and the lipstick marks had long since worn off. Ryan's Adam's apple moved. "Welcome to what?" The lights on the console flashed faster. 2 short and 1 long. 2 short and 1 long. Like counting heartbeats. Erin's phone exploded on the table. She rushed over wrapped in a blanket, and the screen was blindingly bright. "There is a new reply in Catherine's encryption community." I leaned over. Catherine's post was titled 100.1 MHz non-local receiver records, and an anonymous comment read, "I heard it too. It's in the music I make." Attached to the post was a guitar riff, the sound of electricity as thin as spider silk. "Amplify the low frequencies." Ryan grabbed Irene's phone. He ran his fingertips across the screen, and the spider silk suddenly thickened, exactly the same as Silverstream's 100.1 MHz waveform. "It's looking for resonance," I said softly. When Catherine first received the signal 3 days ago, she was using an amateur radio to measure the ionosphere. Now this anonymous user must be someone who can resonate with low-frequency waves. Irene shuddered. Her ID is Subway Piano Box. The mailbox notification sound rang at this moment. I clicked on it, and the sender was mbaker@uov.ca. Marcus Baker. The title is frighteningly straightforward. LQ1, Validation of the Mind Mapping System. Attached is a 20-page draft of the paper. I scanned the key sentence. Signal grammar conforms to the mind explicit model in neurolinguistics, temporarily named LQ1. This is not just sound, it is a projection medium of consciousness. The last paragraph was highlighted in red pen. I must go to Silver Creek Town. I want to see this bridge. He'll be arriving tomorrow. Ryan leaned over to take a look. The FBI approved a pass for him this morning. I squeezed my phone. How many of the 17 miners who died in the mine accident 20 years ago are still alive? Catherine in Calgary, Marcus in Vancouver, the subway piano case in New York. The red dots are still seeping out of the map. Jane. Irene suddenly thrust her phone in front of me. The subway piano case sent a new message. The video shows a subway entrance. The girl in the leather jacket was holding a guitar, and the strings were shaking, not because of the strings being played, but because of the strings themselves. She leaned closer to the microphone. Are you listening? A voice suddenly popped up in the background. I'm here. The girl was stunned. The camera shook, and a dark shadow flashed across the screen. It was like someone passed by her from behind, but there were no feet. This is from this afternoon. Irene's voice was trembling. She replied, and after she said, I'm here, everything went black for a moment. Suddenly all the lights on the console went out. I frantically pressed the switch, and Ryan had already picked up the multimeter. It's not a power outage. He looked up. The signal frequency disappeared. Wrong. I pulled out the white noise generator. It was vibrating, louder than ever. It felt like countless hands were knocking through the metal shell. They're waiting, I said suddenly. What are you waiting for? Waiting for more voices, waiting for more resonance, waiting for that bridge to be completely built. I dug out the stationery from the bottom of the toolbox. The pen traced on the paper. If you can hear me, you are welcome to join. This is not a curse, nor is it an illusion. This is a long-awaited conversation. You want to make a broadcast? Ryan stared at me. Try it. I pressed the paper on the send button. Anyway, I've tried to destroy it. I've tried to escape, and now the sound in the signal is getting clearer and clearer, like 17 miners breathing in my ears, like Catherine's guitar strings vibrating on my bones, like Marcus's thesis burning in my temples. The moment the send button was pressed, all the lights on the console lit up. It's neither red nor green, but a chaotic white. The hum came from all directions, like the simultaneous exhalation of thousands of people. Calgary, Vancouver, New York, and the 17 underground in Silver Creek. Ryan's notebook was blown open by the wind. The latest page shows my hand pressing send, with the words, "She's opening the door." The white noise generator burned my palms. The frequency of this vibration completely coincided with the humming of the entire room. That's the end of tonight's story. Thank you for listening. Have a good sleep. Good night, dear wanderer.